across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side.
And good afternoon. Yeah, welcome back to the home of Common Sense, coming up on 3 minutes after 1 o'clock. Julia is back tomorrow. So, has Tony Blair backed down somewhat on Labour's civil war over net zero? He says, I support the 2050 target, earlier branding Keir Starmer's climate policies as irrational and doomed to fail. We'll look more at that in a few moments. Here's a quick question, though. Why are we not buying in to net zero, bearing in mind what's apparently at stake here? Details to come. Also, the officer cleared of murder after shooting Chris Carber dead in South London back in 2022 is now facing a gross misconduct hearing following a review by the police watchdog. This seems to happen almost as if that's part of the process. It's an absolute outrage. This poor man has already been through it in a legal contest and now he's dragged through more hoops and hurdles to try and clear his name. More on that coming later. And Lush Cosmetics, best known for its bath bombs and stinky soaps, has handed out a leaflet to girls as young as 7 claiming there's a calculated media assault on transgender people. Also referencing suicides as well. Can the soap people just butt out of this stuff, please? Don't like your stinky soap anyway. 0344 499 1000. That is where you'll find us. You can, of course, message 87222, all the breaking news and everything you need to know right here on Talk. Why are we not buying into net zero? 0344 499 1000. The mantra coming out of Ed Miliband's mouth is clear. We're not doing enough. We're mucking up the planet and not taking this thing seriously. Do you remember when the head of the UN says we're on a highway to climate hell with our foot on the accelerator? That is exactly the kind of thing that Red Ed thinks. Unless we change our wicked ways, of course. We will frazzle away and die of extreme heat, or is it extreme cold, or maybe just basic starvation? One of the three, depending on who you talk to. Now, there's a good reason why those large white butterflies in Madeira or the Carolina parakeet no longer exist, and that's because we've polluted the pants off the planet and killed them. Creatures are dying, and next, it's gonna be us. If we took this thing more seriously, there is a way out, though. A narrow window of opportunity. It's a narrow window of opportunity to make amends and repair the damage. If we miss this, we are royally doomed. We're not doing enough. And this is where I'm really confused. It's the we're not doing enough bit. And I think I speak for all of us when I say, yes, of course we mourn the loss of the Costa Rican golden toad. It was a sad day when we discovered its extinction status. Are we really not doing enough? I mean, just think about where we are for a second. Obvious one, coal. We haven't produced coal in any meaningful way for decades. It's just this country. People don't use coal in any significant number. It used to be the default heating for many homes. It no longer really exists. We haven't been using unleaded petrol for decades in this country. Prior to that, everything contained all the petrochemical nasties you can imagine. We've had solar panels in this country for decades. They're not actually a new thing, nothing new there. And in the last 10 years, sales have gone through the roof and, of course, on the roof. New cars are made under strict rules about emissions. Even your classic 4x4 is subject to stringent EU rules. Yes, we still have European rules on this stuff of what your engine must look like. We recycle waste on an industrial scale. New homes are constructed and insulated in ways that was unimaginable just a few years ago. More food is sourced organically than at any time in human history. Our clothes are sent to charity shops when we finish with them. Packaging contains less plastics. Light bulbs are restricted to certain models. Paint is a little more than coloured water. You take your own bags to the supermarket these days. Street lights get turned off at 7 p.m. Our energy bills come ready-made with a green levy. Brits now eat 20% less meat than they did 10 years ago. We've got acres and fields of windmills, both onshore and offshore. They are everywhere. Straws are made out of soggy cardboard. Earbuds are made out of balsa wood. Mobile phones no longer come with a charger. Half the country now works from home. Globally, 50% of all new buses are now battery-powered. Electric car sales now account for over 20% of all new cars. And on top of that, we're told not to flush the loo too regularly in order to save water. And we're told it's still getting worse. This is a bit of a left-wing trick. It happens with campaigning. You can clear things up. Racism, homophobia, those kind of areas. Things get better, somebody goes, it's got worse. Really? It's got worse? Really? It's got worse? We're more homophobic today than we were in 1973? Is somebody having a laugh here? Are these people for real? Kids are getting mental health problems because they are told we're all doomed. We're now told to look at great innovators like Brunel and Stevenson as no better than Hitler or Mussolini. But things are getting worse, apparently. And that's been Ed Miliband's message, essentially. The man is obsessed. He's a famous loser, of course. He tried to become the Prime Minister and utterly failed. He's on a mission to get his name back in the big history books. But he's a dangerous evangelist. So enter Tony Blair into the equation, a man that's usually about as welcome as measles. But he happens to be, like him or not, the most successful Labour Prime Minister of all time, something dear old Ed never got close to. He might be a bit of an oddball, our Tony, but he's in a different league to dead Ed, frankly. He's argued that the debate on climate change has become irrational and people in rich countries no longer wanted to make financial sacrifices when they know their impact on global emissions is minimal. This comes, of course, at a time as this highly critical report from the Independent Climate Change Committee. Who the hell are those people? Wouldn't you like to have a powwow with that lot? They say Labour's made very little progress in preparing the UK for the growing threats posed by rising temperatures since coming to power. Oh, man alive, can you make sense of this? And then, of course, the Tony Blair Institute come out just about an hour ago and go, oh, no, Tony does support the 2050 thing. We all support a better climate, a cleaner climate. Nobody says otherwise. The doomsday kind of grief merchants out there, it's a cult that believe we're all going to die and there's no way of existing, are really where the issue is. And I think when we say, I ask the question, why are you not buying into net zero? What specifically for you is the reasons why this just isn't really adding up? I think I've just given I stand perhaps in a dangerous position. I've just given all the reasons why lots of people are not buying into it. Plus, by the way, all the bad stuff that apparently is killing us, like 4x4s and big jets and the like, it's all perfectly legal. You still do it. Doesn't matter. Even Sadiq Khan's funny camera thing. You know, he's got his ULEZ charge, which he recently extended at the cost of millions in order to catch about 7 motorists who are still driving around in an Austin Allegro. That lot. Even that, you can pollute as much as you like over there in London, as long as you pay for it. You just pay to pollute. So they're fine with it. Get out there, rev your Ford Capri as much as you like down the highway of London. Anywhere you're at, Oxford Street, they don't care, as long as you pay for it. It's things like that, I sense, as to why people are not buying into net zero. But what is it for you specifically on that question? Bearing in mind this is an all-encompassing narrative story that is out there on a daily basis. We've got to do more. You've got to get a windmill on your nan's head. You've got to get a solar panel on the back of your Labrador. Otherwise, we're all going to die. Really? Are we? Is it that? We're all going to die? But China with the big coal-fired power stations, etc., coal-powered stations, chimneys and smog, and India, the United States not really doing very much, and apparently we will die. And it won't just be butterflies or the aforementioned Costa Rican golden toad that don't exist. It'll be us as well. There will be no us. We will have frazzled to death or frozen to death, whichever one it is, depending on the day of the week, because we didn't do our bit to save the planet. Why are you not buying into net zero? 0344 499 1000. That is where you will find us. Let's get a word on this story and the other big stories of the day. Emma Trimble, writer, broadcaster and presenter, is with us. Emma, good afternoon to you.
Good to be with you, Ian.
Nice to have you with us as well. So let's start then with this story. Tony Blair criticising Starmer's net zero policies, calling financial sacrifices futile given minimal impact on emissions, echoing Tory leader Kemi Badenoch. He labelled current solutions inadequate. Let's have a listen then to Tony Blair speaking about this idea of net zero.
Time is running out to save our planet. We must work together to effect the meaningful change necessary. Because this climate crisis is existential and the action needed is immediate. We must cut emissions by 45% by 2030 to have any chance of limiting warming to 1.5 degrees. And this will require proactive, coordinated action across policy, finance, and technology. Together, therefore, we have to identify and take the real actions required.
Yeah. Now he says it's irrational, Emma. I mean, what do you think Tony Blair was thinking in making this announcement? I know there's a bit more to what he said than just those headlines, but nonetheless, a couple of days before local elections, where we know that his party, Labour, still a member of the Labour Party, are going to get an absolute kicking in the head, as I think Pat McFadden described it. Why would he come out and say this now?
Well, quite. I mean, I wouldn't want to be cynical, but I did think when I saw this, Tony Blair coming out with something sensible, there's got to be some cynical reason behind this. Yeah. Of course, the local elections has got to be one. The fact that Reform and the Conservatives are just absolutely steaming ahead of Labour in those polls. But I also think that this is because Labour is coming into contact with reality. If the economy isn't doing well, and as you pointed out yourself there, Ian, all of this climate nonsense is highly ideological and is completely replete with hypocrisies and contradictions. On the one hand, you have the Labour Party confirming that experiments will go ahead to brighten the clouds in order to dim the sun to the tune of £50 million of our taxpayer money, whilst also talking about putting solar panels across the roofs of schools and hospitals, etc., in order to capture the sun that they're trying to dim. I mean, the whole thing is so obviously ridiculous. You only have to talk to a cab driver to get an even more comprehensive list than the one you've provided there, Ian, for all of the silliness of this. But I think the reality is that the Labour Party are coming into contact with reality on this. We've also seen this ridiculous situation where Ed Miliband was trying to explain in an interview with I thought a very robust questioning from a journalist on another channel, was trying to worm his way out of the obvious fact that if you increase taxes on energy, then the cost of energy goes up for the consumer. And at the same time as the Labour Party have been talking about doing things like taking over steel companies, they are, of course, persecuting British industry with these policies. So none of it makes sense. And the overall impact of this on the economy is completely disastrous. And I think that this government is starting to realise that Ed Miliband pushing ahead with this highly ideological programme, Tony Blair always steps in when something might potentially take Labour out of power, because, the man is very good at one thing in particular, and that is power. So I think that the reason why he's put this statement out now is, maybe Ed Miliband will be ousted when the cabinet gets shuffled. But the reality is that reaching net zero, reaching zero carbon is not possible. It's irresponsible. It's a monumental act of national self-harm. And particularly, as you said, Ian, when there are countries like India and China that in comparison to us are just effectively one giant chimney. Yeah,
indeed. I mean, there's literally no scientific way, you don't even have to be a scientist to know this, that you could achieve what Ed Miliband, because it's not, but let's assume Ed Miliband is correct on everything he's ever said. I know it's a daft thing to try and imagine, but just for the purposes of this bizarre experiment that we happen to be having here, Emma, let's assume that Ed Miliband is a genius, he's the Oracle of Delphi, he is the Messiah, he knows everything. Then we'd have to acknowledge that it's a global thing, right? I mean, the climate doesn't just exist around the United Kingdom. Clearly, I think we all know that. My 6-year-old knows that, so that's a fact. Therefore, we can't in any way inform or make a change, all the while these massive economies, geographical areas like India, United States, and of course, specifically China, we can make no difference. So the whole thing comes tumbling down, right?
No, it brings to mind the image of that meme of a guy trying to bail out water through a wire fence. It just comes straight back through again.
That's right. Yeah.
It's completely illogical. And the only way really that you can make sense of it, not to sound conspiratorial, but I think there is an element to this, which is that a lot of those people who are pushing for this agenda are also people who want so much international collaboration that in many ways that would require countries to cede some of their sovereignty in order to achieve this overall objective worldwide. Yeah. You have to remember that Tony Blair and Ed Miliband, these are people who are arch globalists. They believe that global problems have global solutions. And so, of course, I'm sure that they would like to be able to prevent China and India from doing what they're doing. But I mean, ultimately, again, another one of the contradictions of this is that all we're doing here is externalizing our own costs as a country, because where we don't have dirty fuel here in the UK, we're getting a lot of stuff from countries that do, including things. Just one example would be fast fashion. We're so dependent on China economically, and the idea that we can be globally connected when they want us to be, but globally disconnected when it suits their agenda, it's nonsense, and normal people can see that that's complete nonsense. And then you see things like what's happened in Spain, Portugal and parts of France over the last couple of days, where they've made their bed and now they have to lie on in it, that they have turned to this reliance on so-called sustainable energy, and the result is blackouts. And you simply cannot take that risk in the global environment that we're currently in. These people are delusional if they think that we can hold these luxury beliefs any longer. We are now living in a dangerous global situation, and it is much more serious than just some folly of the Labour government. This is about British people's security and safety.
Yeah, and do you know what? I could cut Miliband a little bit of slack, Emma, if there was no hypocrisy and there was some consistency. If he didn't notch up more air miles than a professional airline pilot, I could go, OK, he's consistent. I might not agree with him, but at least he's doing it. Or the government that he's part of that want to expand Heathrow Airport, and I think Luton Airport as well. I mean, that seems to be a little bit at odds, surely, with this evangelical idea, but it suits them to go that way on this particular one. So it's the rank hypocrisy, the unfathomable nature, the sort of anti-intellectual position of this that just sounds very much... Do you remember the sixth form when people would have wacky ideas and really felt, passionately about them at the time? That kind of messed up thinking that frankly crumbles. You don't have to remove much intellectual scaffolding to see the argument just fall to its foundations.
I'm sure that listeners would thoroughly enjoy seeing Ed Miliband taking a boat Greta Thunberg style to whatever the next COP meeting is. But I think it wasn't that long ago that I don't remember the details of this, but I think they actually cleared an enormous path in the rainforest for one of these climate meetings.
Yes, they did.
A load of rainforest to build an enormous road. And these people, they don't do their meetings by Zoom. They fly to these jollies that they have.
That was the most extraordinary. And again, when you challenge somebody on that side of the argument, they go, oh, no, you don't understand. I mean, they were probably going to build a road there anyway at some point. It's like, well, why would they be doing that? It's the Amazon rainforest. As if it hasn't had enough of a kicking over the years. Since I was 4, they've been arguing about the problems with the Amazon rainforest, and you're literally knocking it down, building the equivalent of the M6 in order to get people to a climate change conference. You can't make it.
Remember that the plans to to dim the sun by lightening the clouds seems to involve putting aerosols into them. And if you remember, when I was a child, that was the big thing. Don't spray deodorant.
The ozone.
Damage the ozone layer.
Absolutely. Well, there's a lot of aerosols involved in this argument, that's for sure. Listen, stay with us, Emma. We're going to be back in a couple of moments. Emma Trimble is with us, the writer, broadcaster and presenter. Great to have her on board. We'll talk more in a few moments' time, particularly about the extraordinary story of the police officer that was cleared, of course, of the Chris Carber shooting, cleared of murder, but now faces gross misconduct charges. Absolute outrage. Fly tippers are on the agenda as well. You can call us at this end as well. Why are you not buying into net zero? Very simple question. 0344 499 1000.
Defence of murder, it requires you to have malice aforethought,
Yes.
you know, that you've actually planned, thought about what you're doing. As Sergeant Blake had a split second to make a decision. And as you've seen, a car is more deadly sometimes than a gun. And I just think the public will see this once again as the police being under attack when the police get rightly criticised about things, about not solving enough crime, not being on patrol enough. But here we are, dedicated officers who were keeping Londoners safe.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
We are, of course, 1:25 looking at the big stories of the day. Emma Trimble, the writer and broadcaster, is with us. This one, Emma, devastating news for the officer that was cleared of murder after shooting dead Chris Carver. As we now understand, he will face a gross misconduct hearing following a review by the police watchdog. Let's have a listen to Mark Rowley. He's, of course, the head of the Metropolitan Police. This is his statement going back to October last year.
The jury system is the cornerstone of British justice, and today, after 2 weeks of evidence, 12 men and women have cleared Sergeant Martin Blake of murder. Today's verdict is significant. No firearms officer sets out on duty intent on ending a life. Their sole purpose is the complete opposite: the protection and the preservation of life. Sergeant Blake made a split-second decision on what he believed was necessary to protect his colleagues and to protect London. The jury decided that was an honestly held belief and that the force used was reasonable.
So that was then, Emma, how things can change, because whilst nothing moves in terms of the legal verdict, what's happened now is the IOPC, the Independent Office of Police Conduct, they get involved and they try to look for a misconduct hearing, which they have got. Could end either way. It could mean this man's career is finished. I mean, I find it slightly outrageous that a court can clear you, and a jury, as Mr. Rowley said there, who witnessed all the full details, and there was a lot of details in this case, and yet you can find that one of your own bodies that are there in the world of policing can hammer in some more pain for you by saying, actually, you're going to face a gross misconduct hearing now. Extraordinary.
I can imagine that the officer and his family are probably pretty devastated by this. The threshold for evidence of misconduct is much, much lower, obviously, than in a criminal case. And he was found innocent of that, found not guilty even, despite the fact that the jury weren't told that Chris Kaba was involved in and was a key member, a core member of one of South East London's big criminal gangs. So they found him not guilty, even though they obviously didn't have all of that character context for what had occurred there. I think, I don't trust the police at all. I think that we know that they're at an all-time low in terms of public opinion. When you mentioned Mark Rowley there, I was wondering, what we were about to see, because
well, you never know with him, do you?
What has he said now?
Yeah.
But I think I have very little faith in the police when it comes to this sort of thing, and you have to wonder, why would somebody go and put themselves at risk and join the police force when there's the potential for them to, even when found not guilty in a criminal case, to face this kind of misconduct hearing. And now I think that the government may be looking into changing the rules around this, but obviously the police are going ahead with things as they stand. I think their argument is that they have no choice, really. Their hands are tied. They have to do this misconduct hearing. But we've seen before in various different cases, the police marking their own homework, and it seems that they always act in the sort of to the benefit of the leadership of the police. And maybe individual police officers might be collateral damage. At least that's the optics that sends to potential recruits into the public.
100%. One story here as well: fly tippers. We often hear about these charlatans, horrible people. Fly tippers' vehicles will be seized with offenders facing crushing if guilty. I think that should be offenders' vehicles facing a crushing if guilty, rather than the offender themselves, although I wouldn't have a problem with that. Councils have said they will use drones and CCTV to identify and charge them. It means, Emma, that this man will finally be happy.
Yeah, so you thought you were going to come and dump it here?
Yeah, no, I don't do that anymore. Leave it.
But
Don't worry.
Because look at all this. You see all this? Everybody's been dumping all that stuff, and we've had enough. We've got rats. He's got rats in his house.
We've been playing that clip, Emma, for about 4 years on and off when these stories crop up, so it was very relevant we do it today. We've only got about 20 seconds on this one, but, nobody's going to not support greater measures to capture fly tippers. I'd like to hear Mr Starmer be quite as enthusiastic about, I don't know, channel migrants maybe, but apparently fly tippers are a bit of an easier catch.
Yeah, it might be a case of whack-a-mole, but great if you catch them, crush their van into a cube. Why not? I think the public would love to see it.
Indeed. And a final one here. I know you have strong views on this. Lush Cosmetics painstakingly included a trans rights leaflet in party bags for 7-year-olds. It was produced with Trans Actual, claims media attacks on trans people are encouraging violence and spreading hate, all sorts of things. Why is this soap company, that's the place, by the way, for those who don't know, that absolutely reeks every time you walk past it in the high street, that place, why are they going there? It's not the first time I think they've got political about things either.
Yeah, no, they've got a track record of being highly political on certain issues. And they decorated one of their shop windows with some of this pro-trans propaganda in response to the court's decision to rule that biological women are adult human females, or that women are biological females. I think it's absolutely abominable that they would put some propaganda material into the party bags of, these are 7, 8-year-old kids who've gone to a party at Lush, and they're being given propaganda goodie bags. This is it is the mistreatment of children, which is highly ironic given the argument that the opposition would make that gender affirming care is also the mistreatment of children. But targeting young children in this way, I think, is just absolutely abominable. And people should make a song and dance about it. Don't shop at Lush. Yeah. Challenge them on it, because we shouldn't be accepting this from companies like Lush.
Indeed. And since when did soap companies start doing parties anyway? I mean, that's another part of this story, but maybe we'll pursue that for another day. Listen, Emma, it's been great to have you on with us. We will speak again, I hope. Emma Trimble, the writer and broadcaster, with us on the programme. Thank you to her. Anything you've heard there, 0344 499 1000. Particularly that main question, why are we not buying into net? Why are you not buying into net zero? We'll talk to Richard Power Said. He is, of course, a Labour man. He's researching New Labour's energy policy at the moment. What's that telling him? How consistent is it? And what does he think about Tony Blair's intervention? Details coming next, and over to you as well. It's just gone 1:30. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Kev is back, well rested now. He's into day 3 of the political asylum, 7 o'clock this evening, right here on Talk. It's 25 to 2. So Tony Blair has apparently backed down a little bit on Labour's row over net zero, saying he is behind the 2050 target. I think if you read more into what was said, obviously you get the headlines, and we know that what the headlines said, that it's the Starmer's climate policies were irrational and doomed to fail, claiming voters are being asked to make financial sacrifices for what he called a minimal impact on global emissions. But actually within the report, I think it's quite clear that he actually does support the 2050 goal. The Climate Change Committee, however, has warned that the government's dragging its feet on climate adaptation, leaving the UK wide open to the risk of extreme weather. I don't know how much more a country, a people, our infrastructure, our engineering, how we make things, how we produce things, how we behave, what we do in terms of our diets, how we transport ourselves around the planet. I mean, it bears no resemblance to even 20 years ago. I mean, it's completely changed. Over 20% of new cars are electric. That figure is rising. Windmills, solar panels, the food we eat, how we construct buildings, the sort of way we put a light bulb, the kind of light. I mean, it's endless. Recycle, goodness me. And there is this sense that, yeah, OK, we've done it now, master. Yeah, not good enough. Go back and do more. Let's speak with Richard Power-Said. Richard, of course, knows all about the Labour Party. It's a part of his DNA. He's a historian currently researching New Labour's energy policy and former Labour Party official. Good to have you back on with us, Richard. Listen, I'm fascinated by that. You're researching New Labour's energy policy. I mean, how long does that take? A couple of days, or is it a bit more to it than that? So Tony Blair read it and came to a very swift conclusion.
Little bit more than that. It's always a little bit more complicated than you think. I'll send you my PhD when it's finished,
All
mate.
right, OK. I don't want any way to underestimate the work, which I'm sure is challenging at times, that you're putting into that. So congratulations on that point, Richard. But listen, I mean, Tony Blair, I did make it clear at the beginning, like all of these things, there's headlines and then there's details. And the headlines say one thing. Actually, when you drill down, I don't think Tony Blair has ever said he doesn't support the 2050 goal.
No, I mean, look, like you say, you've got to distinguish between the rhetoric and the actual substance, right? The rhetoric was pretty bad, frankly. The rhetoric seemed to be discouraging us from making Britain as globally competitive with the clean energy investment and the clean energy jobs of the future. And it seemed to be saying that we shouldn't be insulating ourselves from Vladimir Putin and the way he's trying to manipulate our energy bills, not trying to, very successfully manipulating our energy bills. And you know what? The government's doing so much work to protect us from whatever Putin wants to do next. And, unfortunately, you've got people like Kemi Badenoch and Nigel Farage who, for some reason, do not want us to insulate ourselves from whatever Putin's going to do next. But I'm very glad to say that Keir Starmer's fully behind that. And I'm very glad to say that Tony Blair has now clarified that he supports that.
I mean, Richard, I can tell you used to work for the Labour Party, and I'm sure you will do in the future. I mean, that was you invoked the Putin card, which is kind of sort of the contemporary Godwin's Law thing, isn't it? Very early on in the conversation there. I mean, we don't get most of our oil from Russia anyway, do we? I mean, obviously there's a component there, but he's not controlling everything. He's certainly not controlling our entire narrative around how we live and exist.
So sadly, the fact that we don't actually consume much Russian oil and gas doesn't mean that Putin doesn't control our prices, because we buy oil and gas on international markets. He controls how much Russian oil and gas goes onto those markets, and therefore he can pretty much control the price of those commodities when we buy them. That's how global capitalism works, I'm afraid. But the alternative, the fantastic alternative, is creating the clean energy jobs of the future in the UK by investing in renewables, homegrown clean energy. And the point is this, right? If we don't do it here, then it's just going to happen somewhere else. Right now, yesterday it was announced that Chinese clean energy tech exports had surged last year. And it's going to happen again this year, I'm afraid to say. We should be selling those products. We should be making those products with British employees, and then we should be selling them to the world. But we're not, because
it's never going to happen, though, is it? It's never going to happen, Richard, though, is it? It's a bit like the textile industry trying to nick it from the Far East back in the sort of 80s. I mean, it's gone. China have that market. They've got 80% of that market. We're not going to suddenly start. We're not going to become a global force in making solar panels or windmills.
It's not only about those, it's all sorts of other things. For instance, Blair was talking about carbon capture and storage. The UK just announced last week 2,000 new jobs in carbon capture and storage. That's private sector jobs, of course, because the private sector has invested about $1 billion in that already. And the UK government is saying, well, you're so enthusiastic about it, we're going to put in $1 billion every year for the next 25 years. This is how we make sure that we're creating the clean energy jobs of the future here in the UK.
And of course, carbon capture on that specifically does sort of divide the room among environmentalists. Of course, not everybody is a supporter, right? But that's fine. We have these arguments and these discussions. I think what perturbs many people, Richard, is it's the kind of doomsday scenario problem. It's the grief cult problem that many people seem to have. If we don't do this, we're all going to die. I mean, there will be jobs, of course, if you have a new industry, like a fourth industrial revolution, and in this case, in the green environmental areas of life, yes, you will create new jobs. I mean, how many are lost elsewhere is perhaps another argument. But it's the idea that we're going to die if we don't do something. I think that's the bit that doesn't seem to sit well with many people, because we can already see the hypocrisy from Labour. They're expanding not one but two airports. They're still monkeying around a little bit with oil. Ed Miliband can't keep off a flipping aeroplane for love nor money, and they're knocking down the Amazon rainforest to build the M6. So we have all of these issues we're trying to challenge with, and Richard has just lost us on the line there. We'll get him back on. All of the challenges that are out there at the moment, Richard, which seems to sit with many people as, you know, at best, a bit hypocritical.
So, you know what? There are people out there who want to feed you doomsday scenarios. And if I'm honest with you, I am pretty worried about what would happen if we don't go for the clean energy jobs of the future and make ourselves globally competitive.
What are you worried about, Richard? What do you think is going to happen? I can tell you now, you're going to be fine, by the way.
Well, look, we've already seen what extreme weather does in lots of circumstances over our lifetimes. You know, flooding has got much worse in the UK. We're seeing coastal erosion all around the UK as well. But what I would say is that, like, we don't actually need to focus on that stuff, because the opportunities of the clean industrial revolution are so fantastic. And the point is that whilst Germany last month announced 500 billion euros of clean energy and infrastructure investment, that shows that other countries on our doorstep are competing for those jobs. They're taking advantage of how the global economy is changing. And if the UK doesn't do that, then we're going to be really in trouble in the next few years. Because Vladimir Putin will do something dodgy to our energy bills again, and in the next few generations, because our young people right now who are just going into the labour market, they won't be able to take those opportunities.
So it's about jobs. Is it just about creating jobs? Is that really what this is then? Is it new job? We're creating a new market? Because, you know, I said this a few years ago, not as a conspiracy theory, Richard, but, you know, to me, it seemed like we'd kind of run out of stuff to invent. We needed a new revolution, and suddenly this green thing comes along. Happy days, because we got windmills and panels and heat pumps and all the various people involved in manufacturing them and fitting them. I mean, great to have the jobs, but is that what the central argument is more about than it is about the environment?
So the argument is kind of twofold, right? It's that the environment is threatened, and it's that the economy is based on the environment. You know, if you've got really extreme weather, if you're dependent on a fossil fuel, the prices of which can be manipulated by dictators, that's a terrible, terrible basis on which to run an economy. So, you know, that's the negative. But the positive is that innovation is how you create new jobs. Innovation is how you pay for the infrastructure of roads and transport and all of the nice things in life. You know, who's investing in Netflix? It's the same people who are making money out of renewable energy. The whole economy is integrated like that. And if we're not innovating, somebody else is going to be able to do it. And very soon after that, you're going to find that living standards in the UK are much lower than in other countries, because we didn't pursue that innovation. That's what Nigel Farage wants. It's what Kemi Badenoch wants. It's what Starmer always has said he is totally against.
But, of course, we have you know, the Conservative government, where all of who wedded to pretty much the same targets. They set these targets before Labour were ever in power. They were all on board with it. Boris Johnson was fairly evangelical about this, even if he did it in a slightly sort of bojo, kind of characteristically clown-like way. But he was, I mean, there was all sorts of comments he made about this issue, green issues, the environment. So they're all on board, really, aren't they? I won't suggest Reform UK are necessarily on board. They've made it quite clear their views on net zero. But I'm just trying, are we really? I mean, the Industrial Revolution, when that happened, you think of the great innovators of our time, back, you know, even before the Stevenson, Brunel, all these kind of characters who are now, you know, the most wanted on the planet, the most evil men that ever existed for their horrendous polluting endeavours, it seems. And yet, you know, we were almost a solo powerhouse globally back then. That ship sailed a long time ago. You mentioned Germany, you can mention France, Spain as well, Australia, India, countries that are manufacturing and doing stuff since we've become really a service provider as a country back in the day. We're not going to catch up with all of that, surely. We're not going to become the world leaders on the new environmental industries.
So the Industrial Revolution and the kind of Victorian and indeed Georgian Industrial Revolution that you're describing there, absolutely key to that was coal, right? Coal, was, as you were implying, and because coal and new furnaces that used it was basically like a new technology, right? We'd had coal, but we'd only been able to exploit it in very particular ways. And then at the beginning of the 20th century, the military innovations that you saw at that time that, became visible in the First World War, that was because of oil. A big part of what resulted in the First World War was the competition for oil. That's always what Churchill said. So if we are saying that we're now looking at a very different energy landscape, right? Those fossil fuels are running out, and even more than the fact that they're running out, they're becoming more and more difficult to extract because they're basically deeper down. So it's more expensive to extract them. And the result of that is that not only are they more expensive, but also we are more vulnerable to the people who've got lots of them and who've got them very accessible. Places like Russia and Saudi Arabia, places that are not always friendly to us. So what do we need to do? We need to find a new energy source that we can exploit and which those bad guys can't control. What does that mean? It means renewables. Potentially it means nuclear as well, although, of course, we don't have much nuclear fuel here in the UK, so we would need to buy that from somebody else.
Well, the stuff we have got is owned by the French, of course, but that's another story maybe.
Well, yes, luckily we've continued to be on good terms with them so far. See how long that lasts.
Yeah,
the important thing, right, is that if we integrate our grid so that when the sun shines in the north or the wind blows in the north, you can turn your toaster on in the south. That way, we can ensure that we can rely on our own homegrown clean energy and create those jobs here in the UK. It's a good news story. It protects us from Vladimir Putin and it makes sure that we're globally competitive in the future.
Richard, thank you for your time, sir. Richard Power Said with us, historian currently researching New Labour's energy policy, former Labour official as well. He made it sound like a Bronte novel, didn't he? As we laid in the park by the lake, I could see the twinkle of the sun just glinting from the solar panels above. Along he came. Oh, he was so handsome. Look at him with a windmill on his back. What's not to like? You can almost see it written in that kind of romantic kind of way. That's what Richard says. What do you say on it? It's all about we're going to be the world leaders. Yay, we're going to be the #1 providers of green stuff. We've got it all going on at this end. Don't you worry about that. Thank you to him. Over to you. Why are you not buying into net zero? Even Tony Blair's had a wobble, it seems. 0344 499 1000.
Are you any good on the recorder? Haven't got one lying around there, have you?
I did play back in the day, but I was very bad, and like most people, I tortured my parents. I used to do Mary Had a Little Lamb.
Yes.
And it was absolutely horrendous, but I was interested to hear that you play the violin.
Yes. Well,
I thought you'd be more of a trumpet player.
No, definitely not. No brass for me, I'm afraid. Very much a strings man. But yeah, I mean, I think I've still got it somewhere. I don't know where it is, but I think it's in the loft or something.
I would like to hear. I think you should bring it out on the show.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
In the last few days, says Brian, Mad Ed Miliband admitted on live TV that he drives a petrol car. Did he say that? I didn't see that. That's astonishing. Not even a hybrid. What a bloody hypocrite. Practice what you preach, Ed, says Brian in Rotherham. Richard says, I don't believe the narrative on climate change is man-made because climate change is a natural cycle where we have periods of warm and cold, says Richard in Kettering. I mean, there is that as well. If you factor out, if there was no humans on planet Earth right now, would all of these kind of extreme weather things that happen, whether it's fire, whether it's cold or unusually warm weather, etc., is all that going to stop? And seasons will go back to how, I don't know, the aforementioned Bronte sisters would have written about them. The winter is coming and all the rest of it. Game of Thrones in that case. Heather is in Girvan. Heather, how are you doing?
We don't. The simple reason why we don't buy into this, all we want is cheaper energy, cheaper prices, and we want to be able to put our heating on in the winter when it's cold. We want to be able to eat. We want to be able to have hot water running in our tanks. We need to have that cheap energy, and we don't give a damn about the climate because climate is a natural phenomenon anyway, and
ever-changing.
that's how the world is.
But apparently it's us with our, gas-guzzling ways, Heather. We're the ones that are, we're messing around with the data, with our exhaust pipes and our proclivities.
Well, we need gas vehicles, and we need to have an option. We cannot have this dictatorial country of how we can run our country. We want to be able to have options. Give us the options. If we want to have a petrol vehicle, we'll have a petrol vehicle. If we want to have gas running in our tanks at home, we'll have gas running in our tanks.
But then you're going to kill the ferrets in Kuala Lumpur.
Oh, poppycock.
You might kill them as well.
They're in the bin.
Love it, Heather. I think you speak for many people, and that's what we're up against, isn't it? The idea that it's, and I don't. Look, we all know that the human journey is simultaneously complex, but also sort of rather simple. Lots of things used to happen back in the day that don't happen now. So if as cavemen, we were up to all sorts of strange malarkey, all sorts of curious habits in public. We did stuff to each other. It was grim old times. And then we refine ourselves. We refine ourselves over the years, and we do the same with innovation. And yes, of course, if you can make a car that is cleaner than using a barrel of oil to make it go down the road, then yeah, we'd all go, that's a good idea. Yeah, we'll do that. But it's the bit that goes with it. It's the kind of death cult, sort of. It's like a death porn, grief porn. That we often refer to it as. It's that. It's a sort of obsession of we're going to die and we're not doing enough. I mean, man alive, how much more can we do, for God's sake? Dave's down in London. Dave, what have you got for us? Hello.
Hi, Ian. How are you?
Very good, thanks. What are your thoughts?
Just calling up to challenge you a bit, actually. I liked your big long list at the start there. Did you read that? Was that off the top of your head or off of a list there?
Well, I'd love to say it was right off the top of my head. Well, it was off the top of my head when I wrote it, put it that way.
It was very impressive. But you missed one thing, which was the explosion of cycling, which has taken many cars off the road, tons and tons of journeys done by cycling now instead of cars. However, just like Miliband wants to handle the climate crisis by using a sledgehammer, most talk presenters would like to see cyclists so regulated that actually cycling would completely collapse because of it. Because every time there is a problem with a cyclist, went over a red light on a pavement, you drag out that weirdo guy that's the lawyer that turns up and he wants all cyclists to wear a number plate on their front, another one on their back. Got to have insurance. They need to be licensed. He probably wants a cycling regulator. Maybe we could have a cycling quango.
A czar. We need a czar, Dave.
Yeah, but I'll be honest. If the government came up with that and they love this kind of thing, I think talk radio across the board, Mike definitely would, Julia definitely would, Jeremy would, Kevin would, not sure about yourself, you'd all be standing there clapping saying, let's get the cyclists. We don't like them crossing the odd red light. They're on. So again, you guys would come up with a solution to a problem which is completely disproportionate, just in the same way that Miliband does.
All right, but here's my point on that, Dave. On the scale of how many people... By the way, replace bicycles with tricycles and I'd be on board because I think that'd be much more fun and we could control people's speed a little more. That's just a little aside. So few people cycle, 0.01% of the population ever cock their leg over a crossbar, that I think, yes, it's great if people want to get on a bike, but so few people do it. I struggle with the amount of infrastructure, the hundreds of millions of pounds that's been spent to make it happen, given so few people do it or will ever do it.
I totally agree, and I think you'll find most cyclists think that cycle lanes are a complete, ridiculous, stupid idea. We were quite happily cycling along, looking after ourselves. Most cycling lanes are ridiculous. I don't think you'll have an argument from most cyclists when it comes down to the ridiculous amount of money and the stupid schemes that have been set up. You're not going to get an argument from me on that. But my son cycles to work. He cycles from Shepherd's Bush to Farringdon every day.
That's a fair old whack.
That's a fair old whack. And he says it's packed when he cycles in. Now, those people can all go back on the tubes. Maybe they can drive like Mike does. Mike drives in. So,
that's true enough.
Although it's 0.1%, it's a hell of a lot in the cities.
He does have a cyclist on his roof, though, I think, in fairness. He likes to give him a lift every morning, apparently, just down there by the Limehouse link. Dave, thank you very much indeed for that. Great call from Dave. Love it. Love a bit of a challenge as well. 0344 499 1000. Why are you not buying Internet Zero? More calls on the way on the other side of the news at 2.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good afternoon. 3 minutes after 2 o'clock. Welcome back. Lots to get through here. Is it a reverse ferret from Tony Blair backing down in Labour's civil war over net zero? He insists he supports the 2050 target, but he did call Labour's climate policies irrational and doomed to fail. So which one is it, Big Tone? We'll continue to take your questions on that issue of why are you not buying into net zero. Also this afternoon, the officer cleared of murder after shooting Chris Carver dead in South London in 2022 is now facing a gross misconduct hearing following a review by the police watchdog. Some of this is a little procedural. It does sort of happen, but not a great experience for the officer concerned, who one moment, hooray, I'm cleared, and the next minute, well, you might actually lose your entire career. We'll have more on that story too. And voters are heading into this week's local elections disillusioned with all the main party leaders, with 41% saying none of the above. What's the deal when it comes to who you trust in that respect? Apparently, most don't think they will do a good job of running the country, according to the latest polling. We'll look more at that story in a moment as well. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk. 0344 499 1000. Delighted Kevin Schofield is back with us, political editor at HuffPost UK. Hot-footing it as he does on a Wednesday from Parliament after PMQs. It was an interesting one. We all kind of assumed that Kemi Badenoch might go directly for this kind of Tony Blair bullseye territory.
Yeah, exactly.
She swerved it.
She did. I don't know whether she was maybe trying to wrong foot the Prime Minister. But I thought this was, again, one of her better ones. I think last week she was good. This week she was definitely good. She definitely won today, I would say. She went all 6 on grooming gangs.
Yep.
I mean, it's a powerful issue. It's an issue that's uncomfortable for the government, undoubtedly. They are steadfast against a national inquiry. That's what she was asking about. They seem to have a little bit confused message coming out on whether even these local inquiries that they talked about are actually going to go ahead. So she really had him on the back foot on that. I thought his answers were pretty unconvincing. He was obviously desperate to shoehorn in an attack on the Tories over with the local elections coming up, you know. But no, I thought she did pretty well. But yeah, it was a surprising topic for her to go on, I think, today.
How does Ed Davey do at PMQs?
I mean, he's not bad.
By the way, for those who don't know, most of you, he's the leader of the Liberal Democrats.
Yeah, an important clarification.
Indeed, I think that should be said.
Yeah, he's not bad. Yeah, I mean, he's very experienced. You've got to say that. He's been around the block for a long time, former Cabinet Minister, obviously, in the coalition. So, you know, he's very assured.
Yep.
I mean, he's not exactly a gag a minute. You know what I mean? He's not. There's not a lot of personality there, I don't think, despite all the pictures of him, the water slide and all that. He does okay. I think the difficulty he has is that no one knows whether the main opponent for him are the Tories, because obviously they're eating into a lot of Tory votes, particularly in the southwest, or they're actually going after the government. So yeah, he does okay. He does okay.
It's interesting. I always found it interesting sitting in the press gallery at the certain MPs where the House goes quiet when they stand up to speak. I mean, former Prime Ministers, there's always that moment. I mean, they're not usually there that long, but everyone wants to hear what they have to say. Dennis Skinner, where the place would always go quiet when Skinner stood up. Tony Benn, because there would always be these, you knew there was going to be some sort of, you know, profound moment, a fireworks moment.
Yeah, and the ones who are just good, the ones who are worth listening to.
Now, Nigel Farage is the leader of a party, so I suppose he's got that, he gets that audience as a leader of a party, but he certainly commands some attention when he stands up.
He does, and he's a very good communicator, as we know. He doesn't need notes, which is always a good thing. I think it looks much more natural. Now, he went on immigration today. You know, he was very punchy. I was trying to work out who the MPs were sitting behind him. I think they may have been Lib Dems, but they were not. They were kind of heckling him a little bit from behind. But he kind of just brushed that off. He didn't really care about that. But again, the Prime Minister was clearly waiting for the question. And regardless of what he asked about, he's going to have a go at him about Liz Truss, because there was this story, I think, in the Times last week about how there'd been discussions between Nigel Farage and Liz Truss, and there was talk about her advising them in some capacity. Well, as you can imagine, that's meat and drink to the Labour Party, who, just saying she was a mini budget, it crashed the economy, etc., etc. And now she's advising reform. What does that tell you about reform? All that type of thing. Don't vote reform. This is who they are. That was basically the message.
I'm seeing a lot of. And obviously we can't mention specific constituencies because otherwise we have to mention all candidates, etc. But I have noticed that opposition parties are trying to pick up on the calibre of. I saw one today of a candidate who's clearly been trophy hunting at some point. I don't know if you clocked that.
Is this the Reform candidate?
This is a Reform candidate. Yeah. So a picture of this person with a dead
animal,
gazelle or something, a big smile on the face and a crossbow in the other hand or whatever it was. They're clearly trying to go on that and look at the calibre of candidates, and it is an area where Reform are they were vulnerable at the last election on this one, because they admitted afterward they didn't really have time to vet the people that they were having, and now there's suggestions they might get 500 councillors, and the counter to that, or the concern of that, is that who are these 500 people that suddenly pitched up, who half an hour ago had no desires to be a councillor and suddenly have?
Yeah, I mean, they got the benefit of the doubt at the general election, undoubtedly. I think that was quite a compelling argument that Nigel Farage made. It's like, look, we've had to do this basically at the last minute, so some people have slipped through the net, but we're professionalising the party. Next time will be different. So he's got to be as good as his word. And you're right, there are a few people who are attracted to one. Politicians in the first place tend to be a little bit strange.
That's very true.
I count a lot of them as friends, but as they can be a little bit odd. But also Reform UK and the way that UKIP did as well tend to attract people who are a little bit out there, quite unconventional, shall we say. So there is always the likelihood that those type of people will one, get through the selection process, but two, are probably going to get elected tomorrow. We're looking at probably 500 new Reform councillors. As you say, that is an awful lot.
Incredible,
and some of them may well be in positions of power in local authorities. They could be actually helping to run local authorities. And if they, turns out, are controversial figures with controversial views, then that will reflect badly on the party and could well do them some damage further down the line.
Yeah. We had a tweet from Mick who says, have you and Kevin ever been trophy hunting? Odd. I went to Laser Quest once with my kid. Does that count? And you might have seen some imagery out there with Kevin and a dead rhinoceros. It's fair to say he actually punched it in self-defence. There was no trophy hunting going on.
It was looking at a pint and a fire.
It was as simple as that. Yeah, you looking at me as though what else was a man to do, frankly. Fly tipping as well is on the agenda at the moment, I've noticed. I don't know how this happens in government. Who... Is it a civil servant or an advisor who suddenly comes into a meeting one day and goes, Prime Minister, we haven't done fly tipping since you've been in power. I think we should. Because the Tories would do it twice a year. They'd bring up a fly tipping initiative. And then it would just get ignored for the rest of time.
I mean, I think it's not a coincidence that we've got the local elections tomorrow. This is obviously something that drives people mad in their local area. It's one of those problems that is, you see it, it's visible, it's right in front of you, literally right in front of your nose quite often, and it drives people mad. So if the government say, or Labour say, look, we're going to crack down on fly tipping, vote Labour tomorrow type of thing, then, that I don't think it's a coincidence that this is when it's been...
I'm absolutely fascinated by fly tippers.
I've never done it myself.
I've oddly never... I mean, aside from the mattress on the A21, other than that... No, I've never... But I've seen mattresses on the A21. It's a big area. This is near me. Where you're driving down... merrily driving down the road. At what point did somebody going down the road go, I know what I'm going to do, Eric? I'm going to shove that washing machine into the third lane.
No.
At what point is that a good idea? Even by kind of criminal mentality, if you like.
Yeah, I mean, it's not that difficult, surely, to go to your nearest tip. And
well, to get to that bit of the A21, you literally have to drive past the tip. That's the funniest thing.
It's almost like they're making a point. I'm not going to take it in the tip. I'm going to chuck it in the road because I can.
Exactly, yeah. What's wrong? Why use the tip when you've got the A21? I mean, it's exactly. As my old nan used to say. But yes, it's curious. I know the problem some people have, and I've heard others blaming councils, saying, look, if you want them to pick up a couple of items,
there is that
they're going to charge 100 quid.
A bulky item, yeah, you're right.
The bulky item, and that I don't know whether that's ever been. I don't know if I've ever had the council pick. I think once. I think we had a sofa.
You do like a special uplift.
It cost us like 50 quid or something to take a sofa away.
Yeah,
it was just too big to get. Couldn't get it in the car. So what do you do with it?
And you can't put it in.
Plus the kids were still on it, so
But you can't put it on your. You can't. That is a bargain to get your kids thing.
Absolutely.
No, you're right. You can't put it in your wheelie bin so you do need them to come, and there is obviously an expense involved.
Yeah.
I'd still rather people maybe paid whatever the cost was rather than just chuck it in the middle of the road.
It's just such a curious.
But it's something that does drive people mad, and the government clearly want to say, well, look, we are getting things done.
Yeah.
And as I say, with elections tomorrow, I think that's probably why they're...
But of course, all this very well saying, we're going to crush your van if we... if we catch you doing it. That's assuming that... I like the way they automatically, stereotypically use the word van.
Yeah.
I mean, it could be, I don't know, a sensible Audi estate, maybe. Or possibly a Volvo can carry a fair bit of kit.
Maybe strap it to the roof.
Yeah.
Maybe.
I bet no cars get crushed in the next year because of this.
Probably no vans either.
No vans either were hurt.
It's one of those ones that's announced and then quickly forgotten about.
And then quickly forgotten. And usually it's local authorities, I thought, that dealt with a lot of that kind of fly tipping stuff. So.
Yeah.
So what's going on with Tony Blair? 2 days before an election, he decides to come out with... I mean, I know the details sometimes counter the headlines, but nonetheless, he comes out, or interferes, however you want to look at it, and suggests there's disagreement from him over the government's official policy on net zero.
No, and the quote...
That doesn't happen by accident, though, Kevin.
Well, it doesn't, and it is driven them mad in Number 10, I can tell you that for a fact. Words that I couldn't repeat on air that they've said about Tony Blair, which they don't usually. Tony Blair is normally a big hero for Labour MPs, or certainly some Labour MPs. But they're infuriated that this has come out now. So basically, he's not been misquoted. I've read the whole foreword to this report by his institute, in which he's very clear, basically saying you've got to take the public with you, which I think is true. But also saying, it's doomed to fail. Trying to force people to give up on fossil fuels right now is, it's a fool's errand, and it's just a bad idea. And that goes right against the message that the government are trying to push out. Now, interestingly, the Tony Blair Institute put out a statement at 10 to 12 this morning, coincidentally 10 minutes before Prime Minister's questions.
Yes.
I think just in case Keir Starmer, as well expected, got a hard time over it, so that he could turn around and say, well, actually, the Tony Blair Institute have made clear that they support the government. But that is not what Tony Blair said, and it's actually unusual for someone who was the consummate political communicator
100%.
And operator, one, to have said it in the first place, and two, to have said it, literally 2 days before local elections, and the Tories and Reform, as you can imagine, are all over it. It just makes Labour look a little bit...
It's kind of weird, isn't it? And I think part of the problem they've got, I mean, whether the policies that they're putting forward will work, I suppose, time will tell. The fact they come from Ed, excuse me, the fact they come from Ed Miliband, I don't think it helps their cause.
No.
He's not necessarily the most sort of mesmeric, powerful, commanding voice. I heard somebody say quite recently, if Nigel Farage came out with all of these policies, everyone who disagrees with them would currently agree with them. And there is something about, if Donald Trump suddenly said, you need solar panels on your roof, then suddenly there'd be, he's right. Get the solar panels going.
Yeah, well, especially Trump. I mean, the capacity for his supporters to believe him, support him, even when he says two things completely opposite, it's quite remarkable. And Ed Miliband, you're right, is not one of those politicians. There's always speculation that come the next reshuffle, he could get moved. It may well be, though, that Keir Starmer feels he needs to stand by him because he's getting so much criticism from the opposition. He doesn't want to give them a trophy, as we talked about earlier. So, he's not a great salesman for it. He comes across as an obsessive about eco stuff and net zero. And I think Tony Blair did make a valid point. A lot of people think, well, hang on, why should we have to pay extra, to get a new boiler or whatever, when China are knocking out, a new coal mine every other day type of thing. It's a waste of time and it's costing me money. So that's the challenge for the government, is to shift people's behaviour but not look like it's hitting them in
the bit that I'm sort of surprised about, there used to be, I don't know whether there still is, and I can't remember the name, an organisation in America called something like Republicans for the Environment or something like that, and they simply worked on an economic basis. Here's an industry, solar panels, wind farms, it's like imagine a world before somebody invented the house,
Yeah.
and you've suddenly got a house to sell. You're going to be the richest person on the planet. That was their argument, that there's money in them, their green hills.
Well, that's what the government's position is as well. Yeah, absolutely. This is the industry of the future, whether it's, as you say, windmills or whatever. There is jobs to be created in the future to replace oil, gas, fossil fuel industry at the moment. But it's a painful transition process, and you've got to be able to take the public with you.
100%. We talked a bit about local elections. I know you've written a piece as well in HuffPost UK about reform. Even reform voters are getting sick and tired of Donald Trump.
Yeah, I mean...
So what's this based on, Kevin?
So, no, this is based on hard data, Ian,
Okay.
from the More in Common think tank. So they did polling asking British voters what they thought of Donald Trump when he entered the White House and what they think of him now. So, as you might imagine, he's not terribly popular, but with Reform voters back in January, his approval rating was plus 31. With Labour and the Tories, it was negative. So Reform voters were definitely more willing to give him the benefit of the doubt than others. Now, his approval rating has plummeted with Reform voters by 30 points, 30 points, from plus 31 to plus 1.
Wow.
Whereas across all voters as a whole, it's only fallen by 8 points. So, proportionately, it's gone down much more with Reform voters.
That's extraordinary.
It's extraordinary.
Do we know why that would be? Is it the sort of flip-flopping, the tariff thing?
I think the tariff thing, but I think what's interesting as well is it's noticeable how Nigel Farage has very subtly started to move away from Donald Trump. You don't see him with the MAGA hat on anymore. You don't see him putting out videos saying what a great guy Donald Trump is. He's criticised him over Ukraine. He's criticised him over tariffs because, he knows what way the wind's blowing. He knows that people here think they see association with Trump as a negative.
Yeah.
And Nigel Farage does not want to be
And there's lots of
with him.
areas, where, even on immigration, when he was asked, would you have mass deportations of people that shouldn't be here, which I think Rupert Lowe had suggested.
Yeah.
He simply said, well, you just couldn't do that.
Yeah.
It's just impractical to do that.
Yeah.
And I think that disappointed a lot of Reform voters.
It has, you're right.
That he said that.
No,
but was he just being brutally honest? Because, let's face it, if you had to say, right, we're going to deport everyone where there's a question mark over their official status, it'd probably take about 20 years to do it once you've gone through all the procedures. But not just that. As you rightly say, Kevin, he's got to get the party into a position where they're not seen as an extreme party.
Yeah, absolutely. He now, I think, sees they're probably going to win the local elections tomorrow. At the moment, they're leading the national opinion polls. There is a realistic possibility, I'll put it no stronger than that come the next election, they could be in a really powerful position. But he realises that he can't just rely on that base core vote. He has to reach out to maybe more moderate Conservatives who might otherwise not vote Farage. But if he distances himself from Putin, distances himself from Trump, they might think, well, actually, no, this guy's been a bit more sensible than I'd give him credit for previously. So it's quite interesting. One to keep an eye on for sure.
Do you think Keir Starmer will go over to final question, Kevin? We'll go over to Canada and offer Mark Carney a state visit with an envelope from the King?
I would doubt it. He only reserves that for his true favourites.
What a
like
funny
Donald
journey
Trump.
Carney's been on, though, isn't it?
I know, it's extraordinary. I mean, you never know. I mean, to be, the Bank of England governor here was handpicked by George Osborne, and is now the leader of, a centre-left government, really, in Canada, arch enemy of Donald Trump. I mean, it's extraordinary.
Somebody called us yesterday because he was previously governor of the Bank of Canada as well, was he before Bank of England?
That's right, yeah.
Apparently, a lot of his policies were quite radical and certainly not left-wing.
Yeah.
And he picked up the economy and took it out the doldrums.
Yeah.
Well, not him single-handedly, but he was the man in that position when it happened. Hence the reason why Osborne thought, oh, actually, this guy's really good. Let's get him over here.
Yeah.
The best anecdote about Mark Carney, is that his kids went to school with Julia Hartley-Brewer's kids over here. So they used to see each other at quiz nights and parent evenings. And after the Brexit vote, Julia bumped into him in Waitrose, both with a supermarket trolley, both in a very different position on the Brexit vote, as you can imagine. They had a bit of a trolley off, apparently, in the broccoli aisle.
In Waitrose, it was all kicking off in Waitrose.
Julia apparently just went, my side won. And he didn't know what to say.
Yeah, well, you wouldn't, would you?
There it is.
That's the last person
Now he's the Prime
to
Minister of Canada.
There you go.
I'm sure he's got a position for Julia somewhere, probably at the bottom of the garden. Kevin, good to see you again. Thank you. Kevin Schofield with us from HuffPost UK. Thank you to him. Over to you, 0344 499 1000.
Blair is now listening to and agreeing with Reform UK policy, as are an increasing number of people, about the madness of net stupid zero. And let's just remind ourselves, I mean, we've seen huge blackouts across southern Europe, in Spain and Portugal, and it may well be that that's triggered Tony Blair to say what he's just said. But people should be under no illusion, and there's a sort of conspiracy of silence. Oh my gosh, what happened? And no one wants to admit the truth, which is that it's net zero.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Andrew in Thatcham says, fly tipping is predominantly done by traders who have charged a customer to remove the rubbish but don't want to pay the commercial rates to the local tip. I think traders is a very generous word in that respect. This could easily be sorted by making it easier for people to use the local tip. Our local one, you have to have a pass to prove you live in the area. You need to book a time slot. And then there are some things like tiles, plasterboard, porcelain to name but a few, which there are charges for, even if you are not a business. So people just let contractors take them their stuff, and then they get dumped. That's true. My local tip, you don't have to have proof of where you live, but you do have to book it. You have to fill it out online. And the worst part of that is, it doesn't take you forever. But, you know, car, make of car, colour of car, address, are you dropping this, are you dropping that? You can't save your details in the thing. So each time you go to book it, you've got to put it in again. I have no idea why that is. When I asked the bloke at the tip, I know he wasn't the right guy to ask, but just in conversation, he said, I thought you could. He had no idea. But yeah, you see, you've got to go through that. I don't know whether it's made it easier or whatever for people to, you know, easier in terms of it not being too crowded at any one time. Maybe it has. Let's go to Francis in Wiltshire. Back to that question on net zero, Francis. What are you thinking?
Well, quite a few things, actually, Ian, because I always try and come on for these types of programmes, but unfortunately it's always a problem. But anyway, I'm the home of, or a home of climate sense. I start with the fact that with all my climate studies over billions of years, CO2 is an invisible, non-particulate gas. It's not a pollutant, which has been deemed to be in legislation, which is a bit of a con. Decarbonisation is the greatest scam ever. History will tell us that. Net zero is not environmentally friendly, as claimed by the Greens and environmental political classes.
Okay.
The damage of net zero, if we're going to get into net zero, is the deaths of the Uyghurs, long-term illness in the manufacture of solar panels, toxic landfill, the deaths of insects, bats and birds, including rare raptors, in the sea, deaths of whales and other mammals, operational disturbance of fish and seabed disturbances. You can't make it up. They're very inconvenient truths, but the politicians and the political class, and I dare say the media, just ignore it. It's an inconvenient truth. And also, who knew that massive subsidies and government grants might not skew the market and flaky climate scientist opinion? The focus and over-dependence on electricity leaves us open to more Iberian events, which are also a pre-experience for something I've written a very complex paper on, for the inevitable solar flare geomagnetic events as Earth's magnetic core weakens. if we go concentrating on electricity, we are in for a very tough time.
How do you rate Ed Miliband? I've got to ask, Francis.
What?
How do you rate Ed Miliband?
How do I rate him?
Yeah.
About 0.
Net 0, maybe. You see, I'm always... Yeah, indeed. I mean, I only asked the question because some people say, well, actually, I think he's probably quite a nice bloke to have a drink with, so I'll give him 1 out of 10. But not even that. Listen, Francis, very thorough call. Thank you, sir. Really enjoyed talking on that one. Michael in Walsall says, Richard, that's Richard Power Said, our previous guest, and Ed failed to realise that you cannot extract gas, coal and oil all year in most conditions, but we can't control wind and sunshine. So how can we have a secured energy infrastructure? They are lying, but nothing will happen to Ed and co for wrecking the UK. Well, you see, I'm so confused on this, and like so many of these issues, you read this stuff and you think, well, we keep being told that, 50% of our energy, apparently on some days even more, come from renewables. But of course, when the sun don't shine, and thank you for the picture of that came from Mike, a nice day at Skegness. Look at all the windmills having a lazy day. The windmills are not moving at all, so there's no wind being generated. And the wind that might have been generated last night or yesterday, if it was windy, can't be stored, so that doesn't go anywhere. But the argument apparently is, well, yeah, but no one's saying it should all come from there, because it can't. But then we've got the solar thing, and yes, we've got some fossil fuels. Put the thing together, that's got to be better than all fossil fuels, or trying it with all... I don't know. I just sense that nuclear is probably the most reliable of all of this. Would that be reasonable? 0344 499 1000. And a point that came in on that same point, this is from Kevin. Richard Power Said is talking nonsense and is so super biased his mind is on a one-way street of the green agenda. Perhaps he should study the history of the world's climate even before the great industrial revolution. Clean energy is a scam. Is it not preferable? And I don't say that as somebody with any sympathy to Ed Miliband. I think Nigel Farage, for example, Richard Tice would make the same point. Yeah, if you can get clean energy, everybody wants cleaner energy. Everyone would like to see, you look at the kind of things that buses used to belch out of their exhaust pipes. They were horrific. No wonder kids were getting dicky chests and you couldn't put your washing out on certain days of the week. I get all of that. I think we all understand that, don't we? I don't imagine it's the full solution. And I certainly don't think that much of what we do in this one small dot on planet Earth is going to make any difference at all. Bearing in mind, you've got a target of 2050, and the Chinese, for example, that are doing more than anyone in terms of environmental green stuff, but simultaneously doing more than anyone in terms of big gas-guzzling cars and chimneys that belch out all manner of toxic tomfoolery on a second-by-second basis. So they've still got all their coal and oil stuff going on. Their idea is that they run it in synergy and then eventually stop one and rely on the other, but not yet. So even if they did that, in 10 years' time, they're not going to hit the 2050 thing. I mean, is it 2050 or is it not 2050? Is this a guess? Is it a made-up number? Is it the science? Does science say? I thought we'd gone above this tipping point, which we seem to have reached several times over the last... Oh, the tipping point has been hit. Oh, we've missed it. Nothing we can do. But we'll carry on with this stuff anyway. Well, I thought we'd lost the argument. No, well, you might not. Well, you can still give it a go. But in the meantime, we'll chop down the Amazon forest so we can build a motorway so that lots of VIP politicians can get to a climate change conference. You can't make this guff up. 0344 499 1000. That is where you'll find us. 2:30. This is Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
25 to 3. Welcome back. Now, as we discussed a little earlier, the police officer who shot dead Chris Carber in South London in 2022 will now face a gross misconduct hearing. The police watchdog, the Independent Office for Police Conduct, has ruled that firearms officer Martin Blake may have breached professional standards, a lower threshold than criminal proceedings. Mr. Blake was cleared of murdering Mr. Carber during a criminal trial last year, but the misconduct hearing will determine whether his actions fell short of acceptable professional conduct. Let's speak with Tony Long, former Met Police firearms officer, author of Lethal Force, My Life as the Met's Most Controversial Marksman. Good to see you, Tony. What makes you I'm bound to ask, the most controversial marksman?
Like the front of every book, I didn't write it.
Yeah, indeed, yeah.
That was the publishers that wrote it. So, but I suppose in essence I probably was. I was involved in sort of 3 fairly high-profile shootings during my police career, starting in the mid-80s, and the last one, really bad timing on my part, was exactly 100 days before I was due to retire at 30 years service. And then, as a consequence of the law and everything else, 10 years after the event, 8 years after I'd retired, I faced trial at the Old Bailey, for as Martin Blake did, for the murder of the suspect that I shot.
And cleared.
Yeah. Well, unless I'm day released and no one.
Well, yeah. What's that around your ankle there, Tony? But the point is, and I've had this discussion with so many police officers and chaired debates on this kind of stuff as well. When the IOPC, and they've had various names over the years, come a sniffing, what a lot of people don't realise, if you're a serving officer, then your life is about to be put on hold.
Absolutely, 100%.
Not for 2 weeks.
No.
Definitely not even 2 months.
Absolutely.
I mean, 2 years, you'd be doing quite well, but it could be longer than that. We've seen officers, hung out to dry for almost a decade while they wait for... 2005,
I was very fortunate insofar as I was investigated just after what was the Police Complaints Authority was rebranded to the IPCC, because that's what they do. Every time it becomes controversial and people realise just how inept they are, they rebrand themselves. But what they did back in the mid-2000s was that they realised that it wasn't working, and so they brought in a lot of mature, middle-aged, pale male and stale former investigators from the police, customs and excise and everything else. So these were really experienced investigators that knew their trade, and obviously had to act completely impartially because they were now acting as independent investigators. But my investigation, and I thought it took too long, was 6 months.
Wow.
I shot the suspect on the last day of April, and I was reinstated early part of November.
So that was relatively quick.
That was relatively quick.
Notwithstanding what I've just said.
Exactly, but what's happened since is that clearly pale male and stale has gone massively out of fashion, if it ever was in fashion, and they have been replaced, sort of the long knives, by people with university backgrounds with no actual real life experience. They've never investigated anything. I mean, I found myself recently being asked, and someone said, well, but these are very complex cases, Tony, and I went, well, they're not, are they? It's not as if the IOPC are given a headless torso in a trash can in an alleyway and told, here, I'll solve that. There's a body, but there's a police officer standing there with a gun who says, do you want a statement? Do you want my gun? Do you want to know how many bullets I fired? Do you want to see my body-worn camera? There is no investigation to be done.
That's a very good point. And essentially, it ultimately, I heard one former firearms cop say, these guys sit around consistently on a loop watching the same video of what you would have seen on that day.
A fraction of a second.
And you had a fraction of a second. You made a professional decision based on circumstances and your own huge experience in this world. They'll just look at something. So they're not trying to find the suspect. They're not trying to solve a crime. They're just trying to what? What are they doing? Ascertaining? I think he had an extra half a second.
Well, this is exactly it. And I think the problem is it's very easy, particularly if you've never been in a life-threatening situation, to look at all of the information that, say, for instance, that Martin Blake didn't have. What we got from Martin Blake was his statement, but also what his body-worn camera picked up. And he was expected to know, well, this officer was at the door. Why didn't, why didn't he do something? Why didn't, and so with the fullness of time, having read all the statements, you as an independent investigator with no real concept of the reality of a life or death situation have more information and knowledge at your fingertips than Martin Blake did in those fractions of a second.
100%.
But of course we're digressing because he's been found not guilty by a court.
Indeed.
It took about 15 minutes for the jury to decide.
Yeah.
He'd acted unlawfully.
And rightly so.
Acted lawfully.
For anybody who'd followed the case, it was
absolutely
kind of a no-brainer. But and I'm sure you would have been ahead of the game on this, Tony. You would have realised that won't be the end of his troubles because the IOPC thing was always going to follow.
I really rather thought that after the judge received a letter from the jury saying that they felt that both the Crown Prosecution Service and the IOPC should not have brought this case to court, that they might have had the dignity to leave it at that. Part of me, the majority of me, knew that wasn't going to be the case. And so this morning when I was told by another journalist, have you heard the news? I was just incandescent with rage because I just think to myself, surely somebody senior in the IOPC with a bit of reason goes, do we really want to go down this route? We've got a bloody nose from the trial. Do we really want to do this? Now with a couple of hours passing and thinking about it, it was almost inevitable that they were going to do it. But something has to be done about this because, I mean, as an example, I stood trial for murder in 2015. So on July the 3rd will be my 10 years since I was acquitted. That same year, a former colleague of mine, who's only known as Whiskey 80, shot and killed a suspect, and he is still awaiting a misconduct trial.
And that was when?
That 2015. I think it was November 2015. Wow. He's not stood trial. They decided there wasn't sufficient evidence.
There was no criminal.
There was no criminal investigation.
But the internal IOPC investigation.
It was a criminal investigation, but there's been no criminal trial. There's been hearings. There's been independent inquiries. But he's still awaiting it. And the toll on him as an individual, and the toll on Martin Blake, it just simply... I don't like the term unfair because it always sounds like it's a bit unfair. But in reality, it is. I don't know how else you would describe it. It's cruel, and I think it's vindictive, and I think it's
it does seem
virtue
vindictive, doesn't it?
I think it's like, right, well, OK, we failed to get him at court, but we're doing our best for you, the family.
That's exactly how it feels. And as you rightly say, what was very specific about this case is the jury wrote this letter to the judge saying, pretty much, we don't even know why we were here. I mean, this was a ludicrous case. It should never have
I spoke to a very experienced, really quite left-wing journalist who has been in the game for 30-odd years, writing for one of the more anti-police newspapers, and you'll probably know exactly who I'm talking about, or he will. But I remember him ringing me up for comment while the jury were out and they were awaiting the trial. And he goes, Tony, my stance on the police. He goes, I've got to tell you, he said, in like 30-odd years of journalism, he said, this has to be the worst prosecution I've ever sat through. He said, I don't know what he's doing there.
And that's everybody
that had any involvement said exactly
the
same.
And I spoke to God knows how many people off the record at that time and leading up to it as well. And obviously, in my job, you get to know a few people, you glean a bit of information here and there. And it was quite clear before this case even started. It was, this is a bit weird. But as you were to compound that utter weirdness, we now have the IOPC going, no, we're not going to let this one go. Is it vanity, like you say, virtue signaling? What's the thinking?
I'll tell you what I think. If you asked literally any police officer in the country, from the commissioner down, in a situation where he was prepared to be honest, he'd say they're not fit for purpose, it's not working, they're rubbish, it's just... it needs changing. Everyone will say that. But equally, and as a police officer, we're all in our little boxes here, and police officers will think one thing about the IOPC. But what we don't realise is that there's a vociferous section of other communities that think the IOPC isn't anti-police. They think, actually, they're pro-police, and that's why they never prosecute anyone, successfully prosecute anyone.
Yes.
So the IOPC are desperate to convince certain communities... and Chris Cabba would be part of one of the communities I'm talking about, and go, look, we've got to establish that we're on their side and we're going to take this to the nth degree. And like I said, I think it's a form of virtue signalling. Really, it's like they should have the decency to go, right, okay, because why are we putting an honest, decent man that's been found not guilty by a jury of his peers, put through this? Because it's going to take another 10 years or something.
Of course it is. Of course it is.
And why?
And you've just
Why
alluded
would
to
it take that long?
a case where it has. Yeah, and why? I mean, anywhere else, in any other walk of life, if something took that long, you'd say, well, that's not fit for purpose.
Well, exactly.
I mean, you came to conclusions pretty quickly.
Well, ironically, if the police were investigating an offence and it took them as long as the IOPC did to do it and someone made a complaint, it would be the IOPC that were investigating the police for taking too long.
Well, indeed, yeah. I mean, that often comes up, doesn't it? I mean, when I've chaired these, kind of panels and had somebody from the IOPC on there, senior officers and Federation reps and the like, they've made this point, vociferously. And how could it be, if a police investigation took this long? And you're not conducting a police investigation. You're not, as you said earlier, you're not looking for evidence.
Everybody's giving you evidence.
You've got it all there for you. You haven't got to do any of that work.
No.
So presumably there's a daily meeting in a boardroom somewhere with a nice big oak desk and some
You might have to find some eyewitnesses, so that might be
quite possibly.
But it's not as problematic as a genuine crime investigation.
Indeed. You know what toll feels like, because having, your name cleared in this respect, but then finding yourself at the Old Bailey on a murder trial. I mean, you can look back at it and go, yeah, well, I was found not guilty. I bet it didn't feel like that when you stood there in the dock as a seasoned, experienced armed police officer.
It's all the other things that go with it. I mean, I think I'm probably overly confident or overly naive, but I genuinely didn't have any fear that I was going to get found guilty. I know that sounds really stupid, but it's all of the other things that go with it. You have to cater for the fact that you might be. So it's all of the legal issues. Making sure you got lasting power of attorney. Making sure that your wife can pay the mortgage if you get put inside, and it's all of that sort of stuff, which actually I found more stressful. We all act.
And your family around you as well.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, my son's a warrant officer in the army, in the military, and I looked up when I got my not guilty plea, and he's looking down with tears in his eyes. He's been to Afghanistan. He's had to do exactly what I've had to do in a military context, and I didn't realise it wasn't actually. I was absolutely as good as gold on the day. I think I just bottled it all up. But the following day, I've told this story before, I was looking through like 150, 200 texts, congratulations, well done, must be such a relief or whatever. And then suddenly I looked and realised I had a similar number of voice messages. And I put the phone to my ear, and the first human's voice that I heard on my phone, and I was just like a pantomime donkey. Water streaming out my ear. I was just completely fell to pieces. And 20 minutes later I was absolutely fine. But we all deal with stress differently.
Of course we do.
And for some people, we all like to think that we're, strong and robust and we're going to be able to cope with it. But there's nothing that you can do in firearms training to prepare someone for that sort of that sort of thing.
And of course, it's a volunteer situation. You volunteer to be a firearms officer.
Why anybody does?
I was just going to ask you, this is a final point, Tony. I mean, bearing in mind this isn't the first case against your case, there's this case, and there are others where officers have, and it's rare, by the way. We should stress that it's very rare in this country that an officer shoots.
Typically, there's one or two events across the whole 43 police forces in the UK where police open fire and kill a suspect in a typical year. Sometimes there's none, sometimes there might be 5, but it's very rarely anything, and it's normally 2 is fairly typical. You've only got to go to Holland, Sweden, all fairly liberal countries, European countries, and it's far more commonplace. And so our police officers, because they're specialists and because they're volunteers and because we don't require every single police officer to carry a firearm, it means that, quite unrealistically to an extent, we can be much more choosy about the quality of people that are trained in the use of firearms. If they fail, they fail, and they don't get to carry a gun. If you go to other forces around, Europe and indeed in the United Kingdom, where their officers have to carry firearms, their standards can't be as high.
So you don't miss it.
I'm stupid. I miss it. Well, no. What's the expression? I miss the clowns, I don't miss the circus. That's the expression.
Good to see you, Tony. Thank you for coming in. Tony Long with us on the programme, former Met Police firearms officer, author of Lethal Force, My Life as the Met's most controversial marksman. He didn't write that line, by the way, just to confirm. Well, he says he didn't. Our lines are open. Back after this.
I do think Tony Blair and his organisation, Tony Blair Institute, is very influential within government. There were some rumours not that long ago that Angela Rayner was going to walk from government. She was very cross on a number of different fronts, and that Tony Blair had intervened and tried to persuade her to stay successfully. So I still think he's very much part of that outfit. I also think it's slightly mad to be pump priming lots and lots of energy projects through Great British Energy if the market will pay for itself. And where I sit in Westminster, the energy market is going great guns.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Amazing guest Tony was. We will certainly have him back on again soon. Let's go to your calls. We started off with that question, reference net zero. The Tony Blair Ed Miliband fallout. Curious scenario. You couldn't have made this up a couple of days ago. Why are you not buying into the net zero scam? I'll talk to Nigel in just a second. Don't go away, Nigel. In the meantime, the voice of doom. It is back. Was it day 19 or 20? Day 20 of the voice of doom. So for 19 days, nobody's been able to fathom this mystery voice. Remember, I said this clue yesterday. You're looking for a politician, a Labour politician, no longer active. That makes them sound really old. Well, no longer an MP, put it that way. It's not Ian Duncan Smith, it's not David Cameron, it's not George Osborne, it's not Nick Clegg. There's a few others that come up every single day, no matter how many times I say that. Here's the question, though. Who is this?
Political decisions were taken.
Who is that? Think you know? 87222. Don't phone us. No point in doing that. But you can message us if you want to have a crack. 87222 if you know who this is.
Political decisions were taken.
Given that this is our longest ever Voice of Doom, we're hoping that right after the news at 3, I can announce a winner. There's no prize, by the way, but there's a bit of glory in being the person that finally cracked it after 20 days. There is that. 87222 if you know who this is.
Political decisions were taken.
Hopefully an answer is on its way soon. Nigel is in Bury St Edmunds. What's going on, Nigel? Good afternoon to you.
It's very sunny in Bury St Edmunds today.
Hey, nice to hear it. Yeah, 22, 23 degrees. Life's good.
Okay. You asked the question, why are people going against climate change? Well, mine is, and what I think for a lot of people, it just goes against your basic common sense. You hear what they say, you can analyse it and make your mind up about it. I think it was Roosevelt said, it's not rebels you need to be afraid of, it's compliant people. And I'm one of those people that always question things.
Yeah.
And, I noticed that you were just getting one side of the debate all the time. And that makes me think, well, what is the other side of the debate? So I'd, start to have a look at it and try to find videos and things from both sides and weigh up who wins the arguments. And the more I've looked at, the more sceptical I've become. I mean, basic things like a nice winter's day, sun shining, gets up to about 10 degrees in the sunshine. In January, the sun goes down, the temperature drops like a stone. Where's CO2? Keeping it warmer. Where's the greenhouse effect? It doesn't do that in my greenhouse.
Yeah.
So, for instance, where is the greenhouse effect? And the more you look up, I mean, CO2, it's the stuff that makes your Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Roller Cola fizzy. It's something plants need.
Do they not?
To actually
the bit,
live.
Yeah, just to pick up on that point, Nigel, because I keep, and you're right. It's you look at something, you go, this doesn't really make sense, but surely the biggest scientific names and politicians like Ed Miliband who are putting their name to all of this, that they must know that bit of the story. They must know that CO2s are everywhere and crucial to life. That surely, it's not like they don't know that, right?
Well, I don't know.
Which means the reason they must have another argument in their pocket to address that.
Compliant people, because you hear them say 99% of scientists agree. Well, they probably agree that CO2 is a greenhouse gas. You can't argue with that.
Yes.
But it's the effect that it actually had. Was it? I think it was John Klosner who won the Nobel for Physics last year. Is now classed as a climate denier. He's not an idiot. You know what I mean?
Was he an advisor to Obama as well? I think, wasn't he? Memory serves me correct.
So there are these things. There's another chap, Richard Lindzen. I would, if anybody wants to see sensible professors at real top universities arguing against climate change, well, look at some of these people.
Yeah.
Your guy from Wiltshire, I thought was brilliant. Quite honestly, he brought up some very good points.
Yeah, absolutely. And you kind of think, well, these aren't people who would want to put their, they're not all being paid by some big oil company to say this stuff. And their professional reputation is at stake, right?
That's one of the excuses that is always put up by anybody who goes anti it.
Every time.
They're being paid by the oil companies, not, forgetting the fact that they're being paid by governments.
Sure.
But
how do we address that? I mean, it was similar with, I suppose, a similar argument in terms of groupthink and, division was over things like the COVID vaccines, where you've got a very small percentage of doctors or clinicians who are very much against it and really do believe that there are huge dangers in what happened and what still happens. But the majority of medics don't believe that. Now, on balance, we're raised to believe, are we not, Nigel, that, well, it's quite obvious, a court case would go, well, I think the 99.2% of doctors or scientists are probably correct. But that's the bit you're challenging.
Yeah, well, sometimes I can't say I disagree with everything. I just apply common sense to it.
Yeah.
Let's look at the thing that your Labour guy, was he a Labour advisor?
Yes, he was, former Labour advisor, yeah.
About whether more events, etc., weather's getting worse. Well, I'll just say to anybody, just Google it and look at the graphs, because you can find graphs produced by, I think it's NOAA, which is the American equivalent of our Met Office. There's no trend at all for more extreme storms. I was just going to say now, I'll let you get on to someone else in a minute. The amount of CO2 in the atmosphere is 400 parts in a million. 400 parts. That's like putting a child in Wembley Stadium and saying that's affecting the whole of Wembley Stadium. It's just absolutely... When the dinosaurs were on the planet, now, if CO2 makes weather worse, then when the dinosaurs were on the planet, the amount of CO2 was 6,000 parts per million. So surely, the weather must have been terrible. How did the dinosaurs survive for 125 million years.
With all of that going on, yeah.
With all of that going on.
Yeah. And what about the Great Smog of 1952, in London, where 6,000 people died? We haven't had one of those since, but apparently since it's got worse, which is odd. Nigel, listen, you're right. I've got to stop because we hit the news, but great to have you. It's a great call. If it doesn't pass the kind of common sense test, and I think Nigel is open to be convinced, but at the moment, it doesn't pass. There's too many kind of overlaps and contradictions and stuff that doesn't quite make sense. Should you really be able to still buy a gas-guzzling 4x4 if it's going to kill the planet? Seriously? And here's another question. Whose voice is this?
Political decisions were taken.
Tell you after the news, hopefully.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good afternoon. Welcome back. Coming up on 3 minutes after 3 o'clock. So we are talking about Tony Blair. Apparently he's backed down a little bit from his original words that suggesting Keir Starmer's climate policies were irrational and doomed to fail. It yet again throws up the insanity of some of the arguments around this and the division that it's created. People are not... The point that Blair made in the foreword that he wrote to this piece absolutely replicated a genuine problem. Doesn't matter where you are on this argument, and that is that many people are not buying into net zero. Why are you not doing so? 0344 499 1000. We will take some more calls on that shortly. Also this afternoon, the prison services brace for more Islamist-inspired attacks this summer after Hashim Abidi, the Manchester arena terrorist, assaulted 3 guards and up to 8 Muslim inmates reportedly attacked others with weights in a gym. What is happening in our prisons, particularly this area? We'll talk to Danny Shaw on this in just a moment. Also this afternoon, we're being warned Britain risks sleepwalking into a cashless society, leaving the poorest, elderly, abuse victims and disabled worse off if businesses ditch cash. There is more and more of it, isn't there now? There's certain coffee shops you can only pay by cash. Yeah, that's certainly on the increase, and there's no sign it's going to reverse anytime soon. Details on the way. 0344 499 1000. Just before we get to our next story, the voice of doom. This is the mystery voice, always of a political persuasion. It's been going on for 20 days. It's the longest one we've ever done. Let's remind you of the voice.
Political decisions were taken.
These are some of the guesses. Somebody said Tony Blair. I mean, it's clearly not Tony Blair, right? I mean, in a million years. Can we hear it again, Amy?
Political decisions were taken.
It's not Tony Blair. Come on, what's up with you? And many people, by the way, having multiple guesses, texting in, messaging in, multiple guesses. If you are one of the people that have had a multiple guess, we will have to report you not just to Ofcom, for trying to have multiple guesses, but also to the United Nations, where it is actually a human rights breach in trying to do that. So don't be trying that anymore. Dominic Raab, no. Anna Milburn, no. Mark Harper, no. Jeff Hoon, Reverend Jeff Hoon. See, that's a bit Hoony, but it isn't him. Brian Gould, it is not. Lives in New Zealand now as a farmer, that man. John McDonnell, no. Peter Mandelson, it isn't. Harold Wilson, definitely not. Kim Darroch, no. Alistair Darling, no. Tony Wright, was another guess. No, that came from Geraint in Wales, who's requested dinner with Alex Phillips, if correct. I tell you what, it's expensive. That's all I'll tell you. Dinner with Alex Phillips, that is. Greg Hans, Dan Poulter, John Cruddas, Quentin Davis. All wrong answers. We don't have a right answer, which means it's back tomorrow. Tomorrow is an election day, so we can't talk politics at all tomorrow. So we might just do the voice of doom for 3 hours till we eventually get a wish. We try that. Start it at 1 o'clock. Just keep taking calls for 3 solid hours until we get the correct answer. So it's back tomorrow for day 21. Here's that voice again. Have a listen.
Political decisions were taken.
If you think you know, 2:45 tomorrow on the programme, it is back. 3:05 now. Prison guards fear more Islamist-inspired attacks this summer as extremists look to exploit overcrowding, which seems to be central to this issue. This follows that brutal attack, as I mentioned a second ago, at HMP Frankland, where Hashim Abidi, the Manchester arena bomber's brother, threw hot oil and stabbed at prison guards. A very serious assault, of course, and they are dealing with it and trying to work out what the heck happened. In a fresh assault, however, up to 8 Muslim inmates are said to have used weights to attack others in the prison gym. Let's speak to Danny Shaw, crime, policing and justice commentator. Danny, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Ian. Hi.
Nice to have you with us as always. This is a very... I mean, there's lots of attacks happen from all types of backgrounds of inmates, I understand that, but there seems to be a particular focus on this sort of Islamist-inspired element, which appears to be what is going on here.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, Ian, the situation in prisons across England and Wales is really difficult at the moment. Assaults, I think, are record or near record levels, and assaults on staff are certainly at an all-time high, with serious assaults as well. Every week prison officers are being attacked. We don't hear about it. It's behind closed doors. They don't make a big song and dance about it, prison officers. They just get on with it. And actually, they deserve our admiration for the job they do.
Yeah.
And the problem in some jails, I think particularly in the high security prisons, the category A jails like Frankland and Belmarsh, is that the Islamist prisoners in some parts of those jails have sort of in effect taken control of wings. And there is a large influx as well of Muslim prisoners who are in some cases sort of coerced or intimidated into joining these gangs. And it's having a serious effect, I think, on order and control in some of those institutions.
Yeah, we mentioned there was some suggestion, I think, after this attack in Franklin happened, that characters like Anjem Chowdhury, who's famously been jailed for all sorts of terrorist offences over the years, still currently serving time, he might be some kind of orchestrator in all of this. Whoever is behind it, however it is happening, I guess with cases such as this, these will be people invariably serving life sentences. In this case, Hashim Abedi, I think, is doing 55 years or something. He's never coming out of jail, realistically. So they've got nothing to lose. They also claim they are working in the name of some kind of God, and even if that involves brutal violence, that's fine according to their own interpretation of their faith. So I suppose when you're dealing with that, prisoners that don't really care, it doesn't matter whether you move them to another jail or put them on their own for a little while, they don't care. So nothing to lose. Is it a way of fighting boredom? I don't know what it is, but they certainly don't seem bothered in any shape or form.
It is partly because they've got nothing to lose. That is one of the issues if you have prisoners on 40, 50-year minimum terms or whole life tariffs. There's no sanction you can reasonably impose on them that's going to make a difference. I mean, obviously, you can take away their privileges, you can lock them up, you can separate them from other people, and that may deter some of them to some extent. But the notoriety that they get, getting in the headlines, having a go back at authority, these are all reasons why they, commit some of these crimes. There may be an element of boredom as well. That comes into it too. These are really difficult people to control. There are no easy answers here. We had the idea of separation centres for the Islamist terrorist prisoners, which was put forward about a decade ago. But this attack in Franklin took place in a separation centre. I don't think it was staffed by enough officers at the time. I think there were 3 on duty at the time that Abedi carried out that attack. It doesn't strike me as being enough. The thing about these prisoners, they're also very manipulative and they're very clever, and they can spend months, perhaps years, building relationships with prison officers, finding out the ones who are perhaps more malleable, the ones that they need to avoid, and then they can maneuver them into a situation where they can launch an attack. They can spend months fashioning a weapon out of, bits of wood or razor blade or a cooking utensil, something like that. Very, very difficult to control these individuals.
Yeah, and in a case such as this, it's only when you look at it afterwards, you think, how would somebody like Abedi be, in this case, I think it was hot butter rather than oil, but whatever it was that was used in this attack, wouldn't somebody like that who'd, let's be honest, have been involved in a bomb-related, a mass murder-related case, that surely wouldn't be allowed near any kind of utensil, certainly not cooking, which must be one area where there is the potential, you would think, by definition of what a kitchen or a cooker looks like and the implementations of putting a meal together. You'd think someone like that would never get near that sort of facility in jail.
Well, you would have thought so, given what he did, his role in the Manchester Arena bombings, and given the fact that he was involved in an attack on a prison officer previously at Belmarsh Prison. You'd have thought that there would be the strictest regimes. But I think what happens is that, the prisoners sort of comply, they go quiet, and then bit by bit, perhaps they get another privilege here, or they get a bit of cooking material there, and they get a bit more access to the kitchen, and bit by bit they build up to the point where they have got enough, materials or utensils to do some damage. And I think that's what has happened here. This was a completely planned, premeditated attack. It wasn't something on the spur of the moment. These are such dangerous individuals, And I think that has just illustrated that you can't take anything for granted with them at all.
Indeed. While you're with us, Danny, I'm bound to ask you about the Chris Carber case, the police officer, police sergeant, cleared of murder, of course, surrounding all of this. Carber, of course, we know what the background to him was. The officer had an exemplary record, however, and was found not guilty of murder. Now, however, the IOPC have come along and said, oh, actually, we quite like another word on this, and you may well find yourself losing your job. You might have thought, we were talking to a former firearms officer a moment ago, Tony Long, who was, explaining to us, because he's been in this very position as well, although curiously cleared by the IOPC, but years later found himself in court. This particular case of the Carber killing was interesting because pretty much anyone who covered it, and even the jury, wrote a letter to the judge saying, should we ever have been here? This is a weird case. This is kind of a no-brainer. But the legal process happened. But the IOPC, despite being instrumental in bringing the case to begin with, have dug their heels in and said, no, we still think this officer needs to face proceedings that won't be criminal, but they'll be internal and could result in the loss of essentially his career and livelihood.
It's madness. It's utter madness. I understand why the IOPC has made that decision, because it's in accordance with the legislation and case law at the moment. And so in that sense, I understand why they've had to sort of apply the law as it stands, because there are two key differences between the criminal trial and the misconduct processes. One, the test that has to be met in a criminal trial is beyond reasonable doubt. In misconduct, it's balance of probabilities. And the test for the use of force is different between a criminal trial and misconduct proceedings. But I still don't see what is to be gained by putting this officer through misconduct process. It won't be held this year. It'll probably be next year at some point. So there'd be at least another year of waiting and all the rest of it, and uncertainty hanging over him. And the jury has tested this evidence. I was in court. I saw this evidence frame by frame, second by second, going over the decision making in great detail with hindsight, trying to find, was he at fault? Did he make a bad decision? Was it murder and all that? And I just can't see the purpose of rerunning this with a slightly different legal test. Actually, the differences are very, very small and very nuanced. It's madness to me. The government is doing an internal review to look at this legal test around the use of force. The results of that and change cannot come soon enough.
Indeed. Danny, as ever, thank you. Danny Shaw, crime, policing and justice commentator. Always very thorough and informed response from Danny. Your thoughts on all of that. But this came in from Carly, who says, say hi to Tony Long, who was the former firearms officer that we had in with us just before the news. I met him in March this year. Very interesting. Dreadful how police officers are treated for doing their job, which is vocational. Yeah, and what happened to Tony was, as I just mentioned to Danny, was kind of the other way around, where he was internally cleared of, you've done no wrongdoing. 10 years after he shot a suspect dead, he finds himself in the Old Bailey charged with murder. And you think, well, how did it get to that? What the hell happened? He was found not guilty, and correctly so. But it's you look at it and think, who would do that job? It's not unusual to see firearms officers around the place, particularly in big cities and towns, whether you're in Manchester, certainly down in London, areas where, for obvious reasons, there will be there's always a firearm presence of some kind. So it's not unusual to see, but it's still a minority in this country of officers that carry a gun. Even a minority of officers carry a taser, for goodness sake. We still send our police out with a stick, and if they're lucky, some kind of spray if they have to use it. It's extraordinary. But who would sign up for that, knowing what the potential might well be, which is a horrendous experience that could last many, many years, while either a court or the IOPC are deciding on your future, your fate, and you were just doing your job. Let's go to David in Coventry on that issue of prisons and courts. David, how are you doing?
Very well. Very briefly, with regards to that item you were just talking about,
yes.
Quite frankly, the police
all police firearms officers should hand their tickets in and say to the government, you have two choices. You disband the IOPC or we're not carrying firearms.
Yeah. And in fact, there was a point, if you remember, in this case where the police officer who had been given anonymity for a bit, halfway through the trial or at the beginning of the trial, was named. And that in itself made a lot of armed cops concern themselves about whether they still wanted to do the job.
But the IOPC is just another woke quango that we need to get rid of. One of the many, many hundreds of woke quangos we need to get rid of. But we just need to get rid of them and people it with people that think with common sense. Rather than people that have no experience whatever.
It's funny, isn't it? Critics of the police, David, say that the IOPC are like the police marking their own homework, which is extraordinary to anyone who's ever experienced what happens when the IOPC investigate you.
You just couldn't believe it. Anyway, with regards to prisons and the violence towards prison officers, we should remove prisons completely from coverage by the European Court of Human Rights and the British legislation on human rights. We should build prisons similar to the American high security prisons, where a prisoner does not leave his cell unless he is chained. I've watched a program on TV. The prisoner is told to approach the door of the cell, a small flap opens, and their wrists are chained to their waist. Then another flap opens by their ankles.
Yeah, I've seen that.
And their ankles are chained together, and then the chain is run between their wrists and their ankles.
Yeah.
If a prisoner refuses to come and allow themselves to be chained, they get a warning, and then the prison officers say, fine, close the doors, and they go away.
Yeah.
A few minutes later, 5 or 6 or 8 18-stone gorillas, covered from head to foot with armour and protective clothing and whatever, open the cell door and pile in. And they give the bloke a good hiding. He behaves. If they accidentally kneel on his testicles, well, that's just tough. He's not going to be using them for their original
purpose. Yeah. Well, that's true enough. But even if you didn't have the kicking, which I think, it'd certainly be, amnesty might be on your case there, David. That could be the only problem.
Well, at the end of the day, Rikers detentional facility in New York is known to be an appallingly horrible place to be in.
I'm sure.
And quite frankly, we are just too soft. We should have solitary confinement for our Islam.
To that?
At the end of the day, they are there for two reasons. One is to keep the public safe.
Yep.
And the prison officers are also members of the public.
And to keep them, and they need to be kept safe as well. Listen, David, I move on for no other reason than time, but thank you very much indeed for that. 0344 499 1000. Thank you for that. We'll have more calls and comments on that specific issue and back to the net zero one as well. Why are we not buying into net zero? This is reference to the Tony Blair, Ed Miliband fallout. They've had a bit of a row. Handbags at dawn over there at Labour HQ, it seems. Now they're saying, oh no, it's fine, we're all on the same page. Not really. Thoughts on that? Lines are open. This is Talk.
I do think Tony Blair and his organisation, the Tony Blair Institute, is very influential within government. There were some rumours not that long ago that Angela Rayner was going to walk from government. She was very cross on a number of different fronts, and that Tony Blair had intervened and tried to persuade her to stay successfully. So I still think he's very much part of that outfit. I also think it's slightly mad to be pump priming lots and lots of energy projects through Great British Energy if the market will pay for itself. And where I sit in Westminster, the energy market is going great guns.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Oil forever, says climate change from the perspective of intelligent scientists who are qualified and prepared to debate the hypotheses. Why are they rarely given a platform? And he puts a link to Climate the movie, The Cold Truth, which I have watched. And yeah, the people that are referenced, even if you don't want to watch the whole thing, just in the first 15, 20 minutes or so, as I remember, Nobel Peace-winning scientists are talking about this. I think they're arguing we need more CO2s, not less. But yeah, it's you know what you think back, but what these are like top of their game scientists. They're often retired guys. They're not in the getting paid by BP or Shell or something to say this. These are independent thinkers. Where does that come from? What's the deal there? And if nothing else, it's what you'd have to raise that question. I'd love to sit with Ed Miliband and watch that film. I'm not saying the film is right either, but I'm saying in terms of common sense and following the authenticity of a story, you'd be failing spectacularly. If you were in a court case, you'd have these guys in the dock with you to support your case, you know? Let's go to Tony in West Sussex on why we're not buying or why you're not buying into net zero. Tony, what are you thinking?
Well, I've got a couple of points. Firstly, if we are 99% of the way there, does it really matter about the last 1% when you consider what the rest of the world is doing? And secondly, far more importantly, 400 years ago, there was the Flat Earth Society. The world was flat. Anybody who thought the world wasn't flat was deemed an idiot.
Yeah.
And when they found out the world wasn't flat and it was actually round and we live on what we live on, these people were then trying to make excuses that you're not really... This went on for another 100 years, to about the 1700s. And then eventually the world decided the world wasn't flat, by which time... And if they do this with net zero, and they turn up in 20, 30 years' time and say, sorry, we got it wrong, well... I don't even want to discuss that.
Well, in 500 years' time, it'll be a little dot on the sort of timeline of history, won't it? Oh, there's little period like the flat Earth.
2018, she said, by 2024, we're going to be this, that, and the other, and God knows what. And here we are, 7 years later. Yes, really?
Well, there's some great Al Gore clips, aren't there? Of you remember him? Was it called an Inconvenient Truth or something?
Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, he made. I think he made 2 of these films, and everybody said, "Oh, Al Gore, he's going to be the great prophet of this."
Talk radio is the home of complete bottom line common sense. Yeah. I listen to Mike in the morning. Unless I'm playing golf, I listen to Julia. I listen to you. I do like Kylie in the afternoon. And Mike, your boy in the evening, is fantastic last night, 4 till 7. I just love Talk. You talk so much common sense, and please keep at it.
Tony, it's a great endorsement. Thank you. Really appreciate that. That is Tony. And I like the fact that Jeremy Kyle is now known as Kylie, which... He'll be all right with that. All right, Kylie. I'm sure he's heard it before. David says, I wouldn't want to get into a neighbour dispute with your last call, says Oh, your last caller, David, says Darren. Yeah, he wasn't going to hang around. If he was running the prison service, I don't think there'd be any problems, right? Anne says, Ian, this persecution of police officers will have terrible consequences for police and firearms officers, like mass resignations, and some already have. And again, I've chaired a lot of debates in this area, and it's bewildering and terrifying for officers. It's so rare for a firearms officer to have to literally use the ultimate lethal force. Really doesn't happen very often in this country. When it does, the world loses its mind in a certain part of the spectrum, and we are left with this, extraordinary debate about, the police they don't care, they're fine killing people. They could have checked, and you almost exclusively discover after the case, after it's been investigated, and remember, most of the time it doesn't get to court. It's quite clear cut that there's not a court case that needs to happen. But what you do find is that the person that the police had to fire at, and in these cases kill, was almost always a wrong. I mean, very rarely was this some kind of innocent character on the mooch. I seem to remember in the 80s there was a guy that was killed. I'm getting this. I'm sure I was a kid at the time, but I remember it. I think his name was Stephen Waldorf, and I think he was in a yellow Mini, and the person the police were looking for was somebody in a yellow Mini, and he was shot dead, and that was a kind of mistaken identity issue. Stockwell, not quite the same circumstances, but we're aware of what that is. Really, really rare, those moments. And they're tragic and no one's defending them. We all get that. We all understand that. But invariably, when the police do shoot somebody, it is someone with a massive CV of criminality, horrendous, horrible, gruesome, bullying, nasty, criminal character. Very, very rarely do you find, we accidentally shot a choir boy. Doesn't really happen. This one comes in, and remember we're talking about net zero and the obsession with. This one comes in from Tony in Essex, who says, we could have tidal power, which works as long as the moon orbits and the earth spins. The tide turns twice a day at known times and different times around the coast, so we can build in backup from other tidal power generators during this time. Again, it's another area that doesn't get completely poo-pooed. Environmentalists seem to be torn on that one, because I do hear some of them say, yeah, it's a good idea. Others don't think it's such a good idea. It's interesting how when you bring up nuclear, which obviously isn't perfect, and they're in its very extreme part of the problem spectrum, could be catastrophic. But, there are so many safety measures and layers of security that are put in place around that. But that does seem to be, I would say, and I'm basing this only on doing the many, many debates and discussions that we've done on this, I would say that one comes up, nuclear power, as the preferred compromise. Not like some say tidal, some have other forms of power, but that, even those who aren't necessarily enamoured by it, they wouldn't say it's the best, but they will, if we had to, that will work. The French don't have, one of the reasons why the French don't have an energy bill crisis like we do is because of that, because they invested years ago. We have nuclear stations in this country. I think I'm right in saying that most of them are still owned by the French anyway, so even the ones here are owned by them over there. Curious times. What is the answer? 0344 499 1000. Armed police, problems in our prison, and that main question, why are we not buying into net zero? And this comes, of course, on the back of the Tony Blair intervention. Nobody can quite work out why Tony Blair, who, if nothing else, is a Labour man through and through, 48 hours before an election where his party is likely to get a bit of a kicking, decides to come out with a statement that is so completely at odds with the government on such a crucial area. Why would he do that? What would be the... it's a bit conspiratorial. I wonder whether he was asked to do it. I don't know whether it's by Keir, and I think we need to get rid of Ed Miliband, because Ed Miliband is not, he's really not the man to be selling, frankly, anything. let alone a policy that is as game-changing and as fundamental as this. Was it that? Was it to make Red Ed into Dead Ed that he was... best I could do. Was it that he... To make him look stupid, Starmer gets rid of him, all start fresh, let's get a better face on the job, somebody who's a better salesperson at this, who doesn't look so evangelical and hooked on something that it's almost like an addiction rather than a philosophical policy. But I think that's a long shot. I don't know why Blair did it, but it does raise the question, it does throw up the fundamental question. And remember what Tony Blair said when he wrote the foreword to this piece. He argued that the debate around climate had become irrational and that people, particularly in rich countries, no longer wanted to make financial sacrifices when they know that their impact on global emissions is minimal. And that is the killer line from Tony Blair. He does, however, say, I still support the government and the goal of net zero by 2050. But I think that point, when people know that their impact on global emissions is minimal, people don't support it. And therefore the policy is irrational. And you can't dress it up in any... There's no spin on this. That's what he said, OK? Why did he say it? What did he mean by it? He says he still supports the goals, but he recognises the problem. Why are you not buying into net zero? 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk. This comes from Danny in Staffordshire, who says, when you see 10 windmills together and only some are working, is it because they can't bank any more energy till the national grid takes it from them? God knows only why they don't. Yeah, I think it is that, isn't it? Don't they? And then do they compensate people for turning the windmills off or something like that? I think it's meant to be this flipping complicated. I swear it is. It must be that. Yeah, there's too much wind, because you get days when there's so much of it. It would power a lot of things. It's basic engineering. Nobody's disputing that, but nobody's saying windmills don't work or solar panels don't work. What people are questioning is the numerous contradictions in the fuller roadmap of this argument, and also the amount of money that is required to get this thing in place and how needed it is. I said this years ago. My initial thought on the green thing, and it sounds well, it's not tinfoil hatty. I think it's quite reasonable. But in the absence of any other coherent argument, The only thing I could imagine is that when they sit there at their impressive meetings, G7, G20, whatever, or down there in Davos even, where all manner of conspiracies come from, did somebody go, do you know what, guys? And they've got all the head honchos of industry and God knows what else. We've run out of things to invent. We've run out of things to make. We've reached peak innovation. Like the iPhone, you know, when the iPhone first came out, it's on version, 18 now, 16 now. It was fine. You noticed in the last few years when the new phone, whether it's iPhone, whether it's a Samsung, you know, Galaxy, whatever it happens to be, there's less and less on it that's new. They'll say, oh, yeah, it's got a new camera. You think, well, hang on, the last camera, you know, you could essentially take a photograph of the rings of Saturn. How good do we really need this thing? I mean, you know, really? Oh, it's got a special app that you can make an extra cartoon of your pet and stick it on the end of your text. Really? I mean, they used to come out with these sizable, game-changing additions to phones. Doesn't happen anymore. The car, if you look at home, your media stuff, your speakers, your big TV, etc., the kind of streaming service, all of that. Deliveries on bikes, and we've reached peak innovation. We've got to find something else to invent. I know what we'll do. We'll have a green revolution. Then we can start reinventing everything, almost from scratch, from the car to the way you heat your house, to the house itself. Yeah. I mean, does that sound too far-fetched? I'm not trying to be, you know, clever or smart about this. It's not an area that I could say I'm qualified in any shape or form. This is just, you know, a bloke in the pub with a pint thinking out loud. And in the absence of any other logic, this is what we've been forced to do on this argument. Then Tony Blair comes along and intervenes on it. You think, actually, maybe I was onto something with that? 0344 499 1000. Now, Rachel Reeves is being warned not to let Britain sleepwalk into a cashless society that punishes the poor. A Treasury Committee report says the government may need to force businesses to keep taking cash or risk a poverty premium for the most vulnerable. Campaigners fear the elderly, abuse victims, disabled, people could be shut out of shops, transport or even leisure centres. Let's speak to Hannah Dewhurst, Head of Campaigns at Positive Money. Good afternoon to you, Hannah.
Hi, good afternoon.
Nice to have you with us. I mean, we are, I suppose, to look at it one way, we are sort of heading a bit in this direction, are we not? There's plenty of places you go to now. I'm thinking of obvious big high street coffee chains where you can't pay by cash. I'm trying to think where I was recently, where it was a cash-only scenario. Slightly took me by surprise. Some would say, you know, whatever the romantic connections are to the folding stuff, that is the direction of travel. And people like me and you, Hannah, have got to get used to it.
Well, I think I disagree with you there. And if anything, the sad emergency that we saw happening in Monday in Spain and Portugal with the power cuts, I mean, people were thrown into complete chaos. Like they weren't able to use electricity or the internet or pay for anything because their bank credit cards weren't working, their e-wallets weren't working. And that is unfortunately just a really stark reminder of why we need to keep cash around, because cash is immune from technical faults and cyber attacks. And it really is a critical payment method that we should ensure everyone has access to.
Yeah. In terms of the arguments about, you know, this term, the most vulnerable, which covers, you know, lots of different people for lots of different reasons. What are the specific problems there? There might be somebody who's disabled going, you know, well, why would it affect me more than it would affect anyone else?
Yeah, I mean, there's any number of reasons why people with a variety of disabilities might struggle to, you know, use a computer, you know, visual impairments or any range of things. But, no expert on that, but it is actually a huge number of people all around the country that want to use cash, not only are forced to use it, but actually want to use it because of all the benefits it brings, like privacy. It's also incredibly convenient, and it's not just a small minority. Nationwide have actually found that the number of cash withdrawals in the UK has gone up for the third year in the row. Wow. So, you know, people are wanting to use cash more and more. So we're just really glad to see the Treasury Committee come out today and call on the government to do more to protect people's ability to use cash, because this isn't just about access. You know, it's all fine going and getting your money out of an ATM, but then if you can't use it to pay anything in a shop, you know, you're a bit stuffed. So it's two sides of the same coin.
It's a very good point. Is there any data, as far, it might be an unfair question, Hannah, you may not know the answer to this, to suggest where we're at, you know, on a kind of global league table in terms of the use of cash? I was recently in Bulgaria, and it was a very cash-based country. It would constantly, wherever you went, you were sort of asked cash or card, with a very much a nod to, please, if you have cash, we'd like cash.
Yeah, I don't have exact figures to hand, but in terms of internationally, we've seen lots of countries that kind of charged full steam ahead into being cashless, like Sweden, that are now actually changing their minds, and their government have come out and are actually encouraging citizens to keep a stash of cash at home for security reasons or any number of reasons. So that really highlights the danger that we have if we just let this slide into cashlessness happen. And I think that's the thing to highlight, is it's not just happening, to us. It's being pushed on us by big banks and card companies like MasterCard and Visa, because it's in their benefit for us all to use their digital payment systems.
Yeah, and of course it changes the value of what is spent, doesn't it? Because you have companies that take a percentage of this and a percentage of that. And somebody did explain it to us brilliantly quite recently. If you take 50 quid and it's cash, that 50 quid is always worth 50 quid. But if you put it through the digital system, it reduces wherever it goes. But the people that don't lose the money are those that are responsible for the transaction.
Yeah, but in terms of small businesses, they're hugely impacted by this. I mean, the payment systems regulator actually came out and criticised Visa and MasterCard last year for having a monopoly on digital payments, because it allowed them to hike fees on small businesses by up to 30%. And what are those small businesses going to do? They're either going to have to eat that cost or pass it on to us, the customers. So we're really all losing out from this move to a cashless society. So that's really why we need the government to do more to push for cash acceptance.
There it is. Hannah, great to have you on. Thank you. Hannah Dewhurst, Head of Campaigns at Positive Money. It's a bit for me, it's a double-edged sword, because I like not having to remember to take money with me. I usually have a tenner in my wallet, and my wallet really just consists of cards, but mostly the phone is how I kind of pay for everything. I mean, do you remember when like Apple Pay and digital payments came out? You could only sometimes spend up to a certain amount, and you couldn't use, not every place accepted Google Pay or Apple Pay, so you had to be a bit discerning. And then that very quickly got addressed. You can pretty much buy anything on your phone. So the convenience factor, it's very easy to understand that, right? Even if you're, I'd hate to see cash disappear altogether. Do you know, I had a £50 note the other day, and because a mate of mine owed me some money, and he gave me a £50 note. And I was a bit grumpy at first, until I realised, I don't think I've ever had a £50 note until that moment. And I'm trying to remember where, I think I might have spent it in Tesco. I can't fully recall, but I'm pretty sure there was a moment of, oh no, I tell you where, no, it wasn't there. No, anyway, regardless of where it was, it's a very odd thing to have with you, because you feel a bit of a criminal with a £50 note in your hand. It's a bit strange, but the folding stuff, counting money, I can absolutely see why, to many people, that is still utterly crucial to getting through the working week. And I know this goes back to the sort of 70s and the 80s. But, my mum literally had a tin for the housekeeping. That's how it worked. And I can picture, I'd love to know what happened to it. There was an old tea caddy tin, as these things often are. And it sat there in the cupboard, and that's where the money went. And that paid, initially it would have paid the rent and the bills, and it was always there. And once in a while, I think it had to be delved into for emergency measures. I don't think there was ever a sort of an overpayment to the housekeeping tin that I remember. I was too young to know the ins and outs of how it fully functioned. But it was quite key. And I know that my nan, I can remember my nan having a pile of coins, like she'd have stuff lined up for, that's for my papers, that's for, I've got to pay my papers on this day, so I've got to go to the newsagents and pay that. I've got to have that. That's how she worked. You can kind of make it work. Now, I know you can do it on your phone with a bit of paper, or just jot it down and email it to yourself and to keep track of what you owe. But there's something about, I think it's in our lizard brain, actually. There's something absolutely primal about that need to sort of see it, to be able to hold it, count it, stack it, and spend it. There seems to be a feeling that the digital world cannot give you in that sense. I also think I think you perhaps spend, I think you waste more money digitally. I did speak to somebody quite recently who turned off their payment on their phone because they felt it was too easy to spend money, because you didn't see it and you just zapped it, and it wasn't until, like, you know, the end of the night or whatever, you look at it and go, wow. You know, if I'd gone out with 20 quid in my pocket, I'd have realised by the time I got to about 15 quid, they only had a fiver left. You don't have that experience either. So I'm absolutely sure it's made people spend more money, and often money they don't actually have or shouldn't be spending, at least. 0344 499 1000. Thoughts on that? Lines are open. This is Talk.
Blair is now listening to and agreeing with Reform UK policy, as are an increasing number of people, about the madness of net stupid zero. And let's just remind ourselves, I mean, we've seen huge blackouts across southern Europe, in Spain and Portugal, and it may well be that that's triggered Tony Blair to say what he's just said. But people should be under no illusion, and there's a sort of conspiracy of silence. Oh my God, what happened? And no one wants to admit the truth, which is that it's net zero.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Jeremy Kyle's here on the other side of the news at 4 o'clock. We'll chat to him before then, see what's going on at the big show. Before that, let's talk to Craig in York. Craig, what have you got for us? Good afternoon.
Yeah, hiya. So, I mean, I spent most of my life in South Africa, and under the ANC, we've got a thing called load shedding, and it's basically what it is that they can't provide enough electricity. So we go for the last 10 years at least, we've been 12 hours a day at times that we've got no electricity. So basically the poor people burn wood, and the more affluent people, they've either got diesel or petrol generators, and that's shopping centres and everything. So You know, and that's a population of 70 million people that's doing this. So what's that doing to the environment? And that's just South Africa. And
they've still never been able to kind of address this deficit, this problem they have.
No, it's you know, it will go for that you won't have load shedding for 3 months and then it comes back with a bang. And I mean, it's constantly that the power stations are going down because they're not doing any maintenance and things like that. And I mean, that's you know, that's just one part. But I've seen where they're burning tires, where they're burning the rubbish, the landfills just get set on fire, and you're never going to change that.
Yeah.
But the other argument I had with somebody was he's pro net zero, and I said to him, so if we're building these windmills in China, whether we build it in Hull or we build it in Leeds or we build it in China, surely there's a carbon footprint anyway, and surely the carbon footprint is higher because we have to ship the stuff back to the UK, you know, rather than build it in the. So I mean, we're a global. It's to save the planet. It's not just to save the UK. And we've kind of got this ostrich kind of thing that we're putting our head in the sand and thinking, oh, well, you know, if we get it from China, then our global or our carbon footprint is like almost nothing. But it's still got to come from somewhere.
Yeah, well, of course. I'm staggered to hear that because I know South Africa have constantly had all manner of issues in kind of finding themselves in a reasonable nick to qualify as being, you know, a fully modernised country after all the historic hassles. But it always seems to be in a cul-de-sac over there, Craig. Never quite gets out the rut.
Well, I mean, they've got huge issues with getting water to factories, etc. now. But the main thing is what's stifling their economy is they're unable to supply electric, pretty much like here.
Which is unbelievable. It's a coastal country. You'd think that would go in its favour in some respects. You know, it's a big place. It's got lots of different terrain, different areas, different big cities that can do different things, and they can't join the dots.
No.
I'm tempted to say it's the incompetence of politicians, because that's usually the answer.
Well, you would be correct.
Yeah. I'm glad we're not alone in that one. Listen, great call, Craig. Thank you very much indeed. Craig in York. Yeah, imagine that you get a kind of Spain-Portugal moment, but on a regular basis down there in South Africa. It doesn't really surprise me. I know they've had a whole lot of jip with, you know, governments never quite... You know, when Mandela came out of jail, it was all going to be tickety-boo. Everything would get to where it should have been. You know, once, you know, that sense of real democracy in a country, once you've got that, you can establish some genuine identity. You can be reflective of your past, but you've got all the tools in the bag now to look at your future. What could go wrong? Sizable country, great climate for lots of reasons, surrounded by beautiful oceans, whatever way you look, and geographically neatly spread, where different areas, you know, whether it's wine producing in Cape Town or whatever it happens to be, different areas, you know, providing different areas of expertise, etc. And geographical terrain, all of but everything should be there. It's got all the right things for a cracking, you know, economy to fly. And it's never really happened. In all of those years since he walked off Robben Island, they haven't managed to get it fully in working order.
Who robbed Island?
Robben Island.
Oh, Robben Island.
Robert, where Nelson Mandela was, of course. I went there once, actually.
Did you?
I did go there, yeah.
With my wife? How is that going, by the way? She just goes bright red whenever I mention your name.
Does she really? Oh, don't say that again, Jim.
Oh, mate, for years. What's working for you today, sir?
We've been talking about the Blair thing. You know, Blair's now going, no, I didn't really say that.
Great theory, put forward by Matthew Talbot yesterday on this show. The only Labour advisor, ex-Labour advisor I allow on talk, because he is so straight. He will tell you that is orchestrated to give Starmer the opportunity to get rid of Ed Miliband in the summer reshuffle, because...
I literally just said that.
Yeah, that's
I hadn't heard that.
And they are saying, inside Labour, beginning the end for Ed Miliband, he actually started my show yesterday and said Rachel Reeves will be gone by Christmas.
Wow.
And that Starmer will be gone within 12 months and they'll replace him with Street, and they'll say, thanks very much, but look at the figures, you've got us here and that's it, they never wanted him. But Ed Miliband, yes. Drag out Tony Blair, have a chat, you're screwed. But it doesn't make any sense anyway, does it? Crazy net what?
Oh, what was the
I
word?
like what Mike said the other day. You know what Mike said? He said, right, let's just say we go for it and we get there in 2050. When we get there, what happens? Do we get a medal or something or what? I mean, what's the next thing that you do?
Yeah, is there a moment where there's going to be kind of like a millennium countdown to net zero, where the last drop of CO2s is counted out of the nation?
We spent yesterday doing food that you bring back, because we bring back corned beef and spam for the VE 80th anniversary day.
Yeah.
And you also the age. Texan bars, Spangles.
I was about to mention
pigs, trotters.
don't know.
Lard. Do you ever have lard on toast?
No, what? Do you think I was born in the 50s? What?
How old are you?
Well, I'm not old enough to add
How
lard
old
on
are
toast.
you?
You know how old I am.
No, I don't.
You ask me this every
because
3
you go
seconds.
red. How old are you?
I haven't gone red.
52. Yeah, you look great for 52.
Yeah.
Near, I mean, 8.
But
are you a bit older than 52?
53, all right.
Why are you worried about your age?
Listen, well, I'm not, but
I'm
I think
embracing
it's
it.
not that interesting, is it?
No.
But I tell you what I am,
stuff.
somebody who remembers Texan bars.
Did you take the chocolate off before you ate the nougat?
No, but the
nibble it round.
problem with it was that every now and then you got a chewy one, and sometimes you got one that was too hard, and it was almost like it had been in a freezer.
See, you are so spot on.
That was awful.
Sherbet dib dabs?
Yeah, they were good. You can still get a version of those, but they're now full of
Usually
all
at
sorts of strange chemicals. Yes, you can. What? And there was. Do you remember
Fray Bentos pies?
Fray Bentos. They're still there though.
Yeah,
Fray Bentos.
yeah.
I never had one of those.
No,
They've got a sell-by date of about 2096.
Yeah, I know.
Do you remember milk tray chocolate bars?
Yes.
That was a little bar that was all connected of little milk tray chocolates. There'd be a
true.
strawberry one, a walnut one in there.
We used to get 4 fruit salads for a penny.